G'day, mate. 40 here. So when Trump did his Liberation Day, when Donald Trump was all fond of tariffs, all right, I didn't immediately jump on board the Trump train, and I'm still not fully on board. But what was very clear to me was that the dominant, overwhelming, one-sided, 100% opposition from elites and from elite media, just absolutely convinced of their own righteousness, that without a shadow of doubt, Donald Trump was wrong to try to install tariffs, to try to bring back manufacturing to the United States, that it was just a complete waste of time. All right, that universal elite contempt for trying to restore factory jobs, trying to restore a manufacturing base to the United States, and to use tariffs and threats and bullying to try to advance American interests, that was ipso facto obviously wrong, and that anyone who doesn't think otherwise is an idiot. Right, that I took strong exception to. And so too with the choice by Donald Trump to bomb Iran. I didn't support it, didn't oppose it. I didn't support Bibi Netanyahu's offensive against Iran, don't oppose it either. I'm just not sure which way to break. But what I was sure is that the prism, that the only possible way to understand the attack on Iran is through the 2003 Iraq invasion. That was simplistic, and that was silly, and that was stupid. That there are other prisms through which to understand some kind of military attack on another nation. You don't have to try to install democracy and to go to all the ridiculous lengths that the US went to with Afghanistan and Iraq. That there are other models, and probably a better model for what Donald Trump has done with Iran is the Israel attack on the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981, which got universal elite opposition, but it was absolutely the right thing to do. You really would have wanted Saddam Hussein to have nuclear weapons. The Israeli destruction of Syria in 2007 of the nuclear reactor seems like obviously the right thing to do. Then the destruction of Gaddafi, I think, was obviously the wrong thing to do. So right now, if the ceasefire holds and Iran does not go ballistic, then right now you have to say this has been a major victory for Donald Trump, and major victory for Bibi Netanyahu, a major victory for Israel, major victory for the opponents of Iran. And here is my non-spiritual attitude towards people who want me dead. So there are many religious people, more elevated people than me, who say you should never rejoice in the death of your enemies. Right? I think, number one, that is just inhuman. You cannot love something, you cannot love your people and not rejoice in the death and destruction of those who try to murder your people. The Iranian regime regularly chants death to America. The Iranian regime has slaughtered thousands of Americans. Why would I not be thrilled with the destruction of the Iranian regime? Why would I not be A-okay with taking down everyone who wishes death on me and on my nation and on my state and my country and my people, right? The Iranian regime since 1979 has regularly celebrated and chanted death to America. Why would I not be thrilled with their death, right? It looks like Israel right now probably killed fewer than 500. I would have been A-okay with Israel and the United States killing every single one of them who chanted death to America. I don't understand, just on a purely pragmatic basis, why you, meaning an individual anywhere in the world, would not celebrate the death of those who publicly chant and publicly promote death to your people. If you're Mongolian, and there is a nation state with the means and trying to get the ability to wipe out Mongolians, why would you not be thrilled with the death of those who are looking to slaughter your people? If you're Japanese, and let's say that there are parts of the Chinese communist regime that do the equivalent of chanting death to Japan, why would you not be thrilled with their humiliation, destruction, and yes, even their death? Right? If you're Venezuelan, and there's some other rival country that seeks to wipe out every Venezuelan, why would you not be thrilled with the death of your enemies? If you're a Muslim and there's a group that is regularly, publicly chanting death to all Muslims, why would you not be thrilled with the destruction and, yes, even the death of that group that is trying to kill you? So if you're black and there's a group that regularly, publicly chants death to black people, why would you not be thrilled in the humiliation, the destruction, and, yes, even the death of those who are trying to kill you? If you're gay and there's a group that is regularly chanting death to gay people, why would you not be thrilled with the humiliation, destruction, and death of people who want to kill you? If you're Christian, if you're Azerbaijani, if you are Angolan or South African or Irish or some tribe in Central America, and there is a group looking to build the means to wipe out your group, why would you not be thrilled with the humiliation, the destruction, and even the death of every single entity that is trying to slaughter you? I don't get it. It just seems completely inhuman not to celebrate the destruction, the humiliation, and, yes, even the death of those who are intent on committing genocide against you, your people, your nation state, your country, your tribe. Why would you not be thrilled? Right? The Iranian regime for 46 years has regularly chanted, it's their most sacred incantation, death to America. Why would I not be absolutely thrilled with the humiliation, the destruction, the diminishment of that regime? I want to rejigger internal American politics so that people who engage in antisocial behavior receive fewer rewards and more punishments. While on the other hand, people who make sacrifices, do the right thing, and engage in pro-social behavior, I want to see them receive fewer detriments, fewer obstacles, fewer punishments, and more rewards. So too, nation states like Iran, who are the biggest exporter and proponent and subsidizer of terror around the world for 45 years now, why would I not want to see them punished, diminished, and humiliated? Right? Why would I not want to see the destruction of a regime that is interested in killing me, killing members of my nation state, driving us out of large sectors of the world, that subsidizes terror against us, that is always eager to slaughter Americans and has the blood of thousands of Americans on their hands? You would have to be an inhuman, so ethereal, spiritual American not to celebrate the humiliation, destruction of this Iranian terror regime. Now, I'm not on board with supporting Donald Trump, his bombing of Iran. I'm not supporting Bibi Netanyahu's bombing of Iran, because rationally, I see that there could be all sorts of blowback. There could be all sorts of complications. It may not work out well. There may be better paths to follow. I'm not inherently favoring negotiations, international alignment, compromise, bribery, or military force. I'm not inherently in one direction or another. I just don't want to get killed. All right? I don't want Americans to be murdered. I don't want Americans to be pushed out of the Middle East. I don't want terror regimes to prosper. Right? I don't want those who want to kill my people, right, who want to slaughter Americans. I don't want them to prosper. I don't want them to be rich. I don't want them to be powerful. So right now, it looks like the October 7 Hamas attack on Israel was effectively subsidized and accomplished due to Barack Obama sending billions of dollars to Iran. So I'm not inherently opposed to the JCPOA. Right? I haven't been speaking out about Obama's deal with Iran. I think on balance, I probably said it was probably the best thing to do at the time. I've not been on board with Donald Trump's opposition to the JCPOA, but right now, if what we see currently works, then you'd have to realistically assess that the decisions of the Barack Obama presidency subsidized and enabled the October 7 attacks and countless other attacks of terror. And right now, it looks like Donald Trump is disincentivizing bad people from committing terror and creating a possibility for a much more peaceful and prosperous world. So as things stand right now, this looks like a magnificent achievement by Donald Trump and by Bibi Netanyahu. But I'm humble. I recognize things could change at any moment. So
welcome to Jesse Watters Prime Time tonight.
When I say, okay, now you have 12 hours
you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either.
Trump is a mad dad.
They don't know what the they're doing.
The President of the United States has committed an impeachable act.
Bring it on.
You're gutless losers.
A lot of that y'all do is performative. Like a lot of these, Democrats get arrested by ICE. Find something else to do. Like I feel like y'all just doing it for the attention.
America building alligator Alcatraz.
There's really nowhere to go. The only thing waiting for you is the alligators and the pythons.
Plus, Donald Trump said he expected the ceasefire to last forever, then both sides violated it. Iran broke the truce first, and then Israel hit back. Trump found out about it right before he left for Holland, and he wasn't even this mad after he got shot.
When I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that.
Oh, so another perspective that I just had absolute contempt for was from the pro-Israel crowd that got their panties in a bunch because Donald Trump didn't visit Israel, and there appeared to be some daylight between him and Bibi, and Gadi Taub was saying, well, now it looks like Israel's just going to have to defy America. All right, so no sense of gratitude for everything that Donald Trump has done for Israel, that the United States has done for Israel. Just immediately that part of the pro-Israel crowd that immediately went into a panic because there seemed to be disagreements between Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu because of the obvious reality that American interests and Israeli interests are not perfectly aligned. All right, that hyperbolic, dramatic part of the pro-Israel crowd, yes, have absolute contempt for them as well.
Well, we basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
On Air Force One, he dialed Netanyahu and barked at him. Sources say Trump was really angry, told him to knock it off. Unlike Biden, when Trump says don't, people listen. And the ceasefire's held since then. Iran's at its weakest point since the 80s. And Israel just cleaned out their whole neighborhood, and they should probably take the win. The question is, does Israel disobey Trump and assassinate the Ayatollah? Does he get couped? Or does he remain in?
What kind of normal American does not celebrate the death, destruction, the humiliation, the diminishment of a regime that wants to slaughter people like you? Right? You don't have to endorse the Trump attack not to feel good about it. I am emotionally 100% on the side of Bibi Netanyahu's offensive against Iran. I'm emotionally 100% on the side of Donald Trump's decision to bomb Iran's 3 nuclear facilities. Now, rationally, all right, I'm not there. I'm on the sidelines. But emotionally, all right, I think this is fantastic. I don't understand any normal American not rejoicing in what appears to be the humiliation of a regime that wants to kill you.
In power.
Do you want to see regime change in Iran?
No. If there was, there was. But no, I don't want it. I'd like to see everything calm down as quickly as possible. Regime change takes chaos. And ideally, we don't want to see so much chaos.
Iran's being strangled by sanctions. Their currency's out of control. And they're running out of missiles. Trump says the solution is to stop trading rockets and trade products.
They're not going to have enrichment, and they're not going to have a nuclear weapon, and they know that. They're going to get on to being a great trading nation. You know, they're very good traders, and they're going to be a great trading nation, and they have a lot of oil. They're going to do well. They're not going to have a nuclear weapon.
So did they promise?
The last thing on Iran's mind right now is nuclear weapons.
So far, Operation Mid.
So what kind of normal person is not thrilled with a decreased chance for Iran building nuclear weapons, the diminishment of Iran's military and terror capability, all right? To be in the Tucker Carlson crowd where you just see everything through the prism of the Iraq 2003 invasion, and you think, oh, if the United States bombs some Iranian nuclear reactors, then thousands of Americans are going to die, and just to be so smugly assured of something that is not doesn't doesn't appear right now to be in the cards. Right, that I have contempt for.
Midnight hammers delivered. No casualties, no escalation, and a ceasefire. But Obama's CIA director, who was knee-deep in the Russia hoax, says Trump blew it.
I think the credibility of this administration really has been shattered. I mean, I don't think it was ever strong, but it has been shattered over the past several weeks. The U.S. intelligence community, by all accounts, still assesses that Iran has not restarted their nuclear weapons program, which they suspended in 2003.
How would he know? He doesn't even have a clearance anymore. If Iran's nuclear program's peaceful, why'd they hide it in a mountain? CNN says the bunker busters we dropped didn't work.
The Defense Intelligence Agency has assessed that the core components of Iran's nuclear program are largely intact, and that Iran's nuclear program has essentially only been set back by months.
Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says this CNN story was written by the same reporter who wrote the very first fake news story claiming the Hunter Biden laptop was disinformation. Now, I don't know who Trump's madder at, Iran and Israel or CNN and MSNBC.
That place is demolished. The B-2 pilots did their job, but when I see CNN all night long, they're trying to say, well, maybe it wasn't really as demolished as we thought. It was demolished, and I will say, I think CNN ought to apologize to the pilots of the B-2s. I think that MSDNC ought to apologize. I think these guys really, these networks.
Okay, that's the side of Donald Trump that I'm not a big fan of. All right, whatever's true is true. If the American bombing, the Israeli attack on Iran set back its nuclear program by months rather than years, then what's true is true. We should embrace the truth. I don't like that part of the pro-Israel crowd that is quelling, is rejoicing so hard right now that they just want to kick their enemies who've been calling them neocons. So I think this is incredibly shallow analysis here by the commentary crew.
Because the line from Tucker was not even implicit. It was an explicit.
I find Eli Lake just absolutely useless, right? I've heard him a lot. He's just a predictable pro-Israel pundit, and I'm pro-Israel, right? But I'm not just going to trot out the same talking points.
These Jews, these neocons, these hawks are undermining American interests. They won't fight in these wars. They're sending our...
Well, guess what? American Jews do not enlist in the American military in large numbers. This doesn't make them bad, but it's not ridiculous to point out that only a very tiny portion of American Jews enlist in the American military. In fact, I believe more American Jews enlist in the Israeli military than enlist in the American military. Pointing out something that's obvious and true, right, is not something dastardly. Doesn't mean Jews are bad. Jews make other contributions, right? Jews earn on average more than non-Jews, ergo they pay more money in taxes than they take out on average in welfare payments, right? Jews make many contributions to America, but only a very tiny portion of them do serve in wars. And to note that is not some heinous act of anti-Semitism, right? There are many different ways that a people contribute. Right, women are not out there taking a ton of casualties in America's wars. That doesn't diminish women. That doesn't make them any less valuable. That is not a knock on women. I don't want women fighting our wars. And I'm open to the idea that highly intellectual or certain groups with certain gifts perhaps should bestow their gifts on other arenas aside from serving in the American military. It doesn't make you less of an American. But it's a fair and a legitimate and a rational and an empirically true thing to note that there aren't many Jews serving in the American military. It doesn't make Jews bad.
Our boys ought to die is a typical kind of dual loyalty canard that, we...
Dual loyalty is not a canard. There are different groups and they have different interests. Now, overall, American Jews rank pretty high in most standards of American patriotism. But a minority group such as Jews is never going to have the same patriotic fervor as the core Americans, right? Jews are still strangers as long as they identify as Jews, right? They are still somewhat strangers. And you would expect the core of a country to have much more fervor dedication, loyalty, and willingness to sacrifice for a particular country, a particular nation state, than those who are on the fringe. So I would expect, yes, Christians, white Christians, European Christians living in America, the core of American identity for well over 200 years, I would expect they would be more patriotic, more nationalistic, more willing to sacrifice for America than groups on the fringe, such as African Americans, Latino Americans, Jewish Americans, Azerbaijani Americans, Uzbek Americans, Japanese Americans, Mexican Americans. It doesn't make these fringe groups bad. We should be able to say basic, obvious truths that the core of a country, right, is going to be more likely to sacrifice and to serve in its military and to have strongly patriotic and nationalistic loyalties than groups that are more on the fringe. When I converted to Judaism, it rejiggered some things inside of me. I developed a tribal identity that I'd never had before. Growing up as a Protestant, I always had a negative view on tribalism. Now I convert to Orthodox Judaism, and I think tribalism is great. It does change your relationship to America. There are some benefits to it. There are some detriments. Just recognizing reality is not a bad thing. I grew up in Australia as a Seventh-day Adventist. Being a Seventh-day Adventist in Australia puts you on the fringe. You do not have normal Australian loyalties. When I was a religious Seventh-day Adventist, I didn't think much about what was best for Australia. Right? Nationalism is overwhelmingly a secular sensation, a secular feeling. If you are strongly religious, that is going to set you apart from those who are the most highly nationalistic and patriotic. Right? When I was growing up as a religious Seventh-day Adventist in Australia, I thought 10 times as much, 50 times as much, 100 times as much about what Jesus wants, what the church wants, what Christ wants, what Christianity wants, what was best for people who follow Jesus, compared to my thinking about Australian welfare. All right. If you are hyper-religious, hyper-spiritual, hyper-tribal, you are less likely to have the same nationalist, patriotic core willingness to sacrifice for your nation state compared to the burning heart of your country's identity. Super religious Christians, Baha'i, Muslims, Jews, and Buddhists and Shintoists in America are not bad because they don't have the same amount of nationalist fervor and patriotic fervor as, say, the core American identity, right? People with a strong religious commitment, a high intensity in their religious commitment, are not going to have the same commitment to the nation state of America or Australia or any other nation state. They are going to have not just dual loyalties, but multiple loyalties. All right, almost all of us have multiple loyalties. I am appalled. I am sickened. It disturbs me. It significantly diminished my love for the United States of America when the Supreme Court, through the Obergefell ruling, made same-sex marriage lawful in every state. Right? That was opposed to my traditional religious, Torah-based Orthodox Jewish hero system. Right? I have a particular hero system. You have a particular hero system. I have a transcendent hero system that comes from the Torah, and the Torah is not thrilled with same-sex marriage. And so my love and my patriotism, my nationalism, and my visceral enjoyment and love and respect for this country was significantly diminished due to my transcendent Torah, traditional tribalist, Bible-based, God-centered, transcendent hero system. And so simply recognizing that different people have different loyalties should not be a canard. It should not be something that is bad to comment on. And that this guy, right, this pompous fool, just goes off on it, shows how much this guy is at war with reality. And he has contempt for people who don't read the great books like he does. And then when he says that, he says, "Oh, I read the great books. I read Will Durant, right? This shallow popularizer on the history of philosophy that he thinks that Will Durant is somehow a great book. He's useless, right? He probably does more damage to Jews than good." Now, right now, it looks like what Bibi did and what Trump did was fantastic, but I am not there cognitively, rationally, because I recognize the tremendous blowback. If it turns out that a lot of Americans are going to die because of what Bibi did and what Trump did in bombing Iran, then I would reassess and say, hey, that was a horrible, horrible, horrible thing to do. It turned out to be a mistake. All right, I don't know what the future will bring. There are just so many possibilities that might spring from this attack.
Here every generation, from Lindbergh, and then we heard it in the early 2000s from the left, and it's a whole thing about you're not real Americans. Who's not a real American?
Well, there are Americans who are more American than other Americans. All right, if you're a fair dinkum Seventh-day Adventist, guess what? You are less of an American than an average Christian American, right? Your partisan, denominational, focus on the next life, hyper spiritual, feminine approach to life is not the same level of commitment to the American project as your normal American. Doesn't make you bad. Doesn't mean you don't have many wonderful gifts to bestow on the world. But if you devote your life to poetry, right? You're not going to likely be serving in the armed forces. You're not going to be paying in a lot of taxes. You're not likely to be making a lot of sacrifices for America. You're probably contributing less to America than your average American. Doesn't make you bad because you decided to devote your life to poetry, right? If you decide to devote your life to Jesus or to the Bible or to various spiritual teachings or to meditation, in all likelihood, you are going to contribute less to the American project than the average American. Doesn't make you bad. You have different gifts. You have other things to contribute. I'm sure Charles Lindbergh had some solid critiques to make, and I'm sure he was wrong about other things. I'm neither pro nor anti Charles Lindbergh. I respect the isolationist position, right? Don't always align with it, don't always endorse it, don't think it's always right. But the Charles Lindbergh America First isolationist perspective had many things going for it during the Great Depression in particular.
I mean, I'm just curious, like Iran's got all this American blood on its hands, and the line from so many of that crowd is, oh my God.
And what if Bibi's attacks and Trump's attacks create incentives for Iran to get 1,000 times as much American blood on its hands? Then you'd have to say that this attack was a mistake. Right? I'm not here to argue that the attack was a mistake or was a good thing, but this pompous assurance that isolationists are terrible people, that recognizing that different groups in America have differing levels of commitment to the American project, to the American nation state, pay in different levels of taxation, serve in the military, sacrifice for the nation in generalizable different amounts, all right, is just reality. And this Mr. Eli Lake, he is at war with reality.
Iran is they're just seeking peace. And like, oh, the only thing I have to say about this remarkable set of events, the 12-day war that ends like with pretty much a victory for America and Israel, is thank you, Qatar. I mean, give me a break. Who's the real American at this point?
I mean, is there a real German? Is there a real Japanese? Let's say that you live your life so that your net contributions are negative towards America or towards whatever your nation state is. It's not an absurd thing to say you're not a real American. All right, if you are selfish and lazy and you suck in more social welfare spending than you ever give back in taxation, even though you're able-bodied and capable of producing much more, right? You're not a real American, right? You're a parasite. And recognizing that there are generalizable amounts of parasitism that differ by group, right? Some groups cheat on their taxes much more than other groups. Some groups cheat in business more than other groups. All right, Protestant Christians are probably about the most honest, civic-minded, virtuous group of which I'm aware in the United States of America, probably along with, say, Japanese Americans. Other groups commit both a higher rate of, say, financial crime, and simultaneously, because they're so adventurous, being part of, say, a middleman minority group, they also make outsized contributions. So recognizing that different groups have different gifts, all right, recognizing that different groups make differing contributions and pose differing risks to America is an obvious truth that should be completely acceptable.
You know, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Let's have that conversation.
And the other thing is that
who's really interested in America's interests? Let's have that conversation.
But who's the other person that he thanked? That's the other thing, Eli. Who's the other person? Trump. The people who warned against this are desperately...
So I don't think Tucker Carlson acquitted himself with great honor and prestige in his opposition to Trump bombing Iran. Right. So I'm not all on board with Tucker. I've grown steadily more and more negative towards Tucker Carlson. So there I am.
Then will be the case in the Republican coalition. For one thing, Republicans until 5 minutes ago they may not be interventionists, but they believe in the projection of American power. They're supporters of military spending and the idea that we should be the toughest hombres, in the world. And Democrats don't think that. They're citizens of the world.
There's a time and a place to project American power. There are plenty of occasions when projecting American power is the best thing to do. And there are other times when engaging in an international alliance is the best thing to do, or signing a treaty.
They believe in international organizations superseding American law and governing how we
Can I
act.
interject with the point
Please.
there that I've been wanting to make? So there are two models of nonproliferation. There is the diplomatic model, and then there is the Israeli model. And the diplomatic model has essentially been the Western model since the North Korean nuclear program was unveiled in the 1990s. And that model is we are going to use diplomacy to prevent the acquisition, diplomacy and bribes, right? Diplomacy and money to prevent the acquisition of weapons of mass destruction. And it failed. And it's failed in North Korea. It was failing in Iran. There's no actually
singing Trump's praises.
Can't think of a positive example for the Western diplomatic method. Then you have the Israeli method, which is we're not going to allow our.
So right now, this point by Matthew Continetti looks awfully strong. Right, I'm not aligning with it. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not rationally saying yes, this is the way to go. I'm saying that as things stand right now, as I'm speaking to you, right, Continetti seems to be making a good point.
Adversaries to obtain WMD, and we're going to use force, and that was Osirak. That in Iraq in 81, that was the Syrian plant in 2007, and that was the beginning of Operation Rising Lion last week. And the only examples of America going with the Israeli model were the Iraq War in 2003, which, no matter what you say about it, Saddam Hussein will never have a nuclear weapon. The Libya example, where force was not used, but because of what happened to Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi voluntarily gave up his WMD plans. And now Trump and Fordow and Operation Midnight Hammer, I see that's been called.
So I'm not a fan of us taking down Gaddafi and creating a vehicle for people from Middle East and Africa to just storm into Europe in the millions upon millions upon millions. I think that was a disaster. On the other hand, I'm glad that Muammar Gaddafi was prevented from getting weapons of mass destruction. Right, that strikes me as a good outcome.
Model is more successful.
Right. So sometimes deals, sometimes diplomacy, sometimes international coalitions the best way to go. Sometimes bombing the hell out of your enemies, assassinating their key regime leaders and scientists. Sometimes that's a better way to go.
The only model that's successful is the Israeli and American model of destroying these programs.
Yeah, and I think we can all acknowledge that action.
So right now, Continental looks to be right. Right now, the Israeli model of just destroying these vicious programs and vicious regimes seems to be the smarter way to go.
Like this is going to be far more effective 10 times out of 10.
Well, Obama folks don't acknowledge it to this day.
I got to tell you, I was watching like Brett McGurk on CNN last night, responding in real time. And it was a full acknowledgement that what the Israelis have done and how it set this up for the United States, that this was the way that it should be. Right. And I got to say, that was remarkable. And of course,
right now, it looks like Bill Clinton should have bombed the hell out of North Korea in 1994 before North Korea got nukes. Right? I wish Donald Trump, if he'd been president of the United States in 1994, right, it looks like he would have bombed the hell out of North Korea and prevented it from getting nukes.
Admit here that Brett McGurk may not be part and parcel of that whole crew.
Yeah.
But I also just want to raise one more thing. As we talk about nonproliferation, that's one part of this. But the other part is this rising axis that we've all been wrestling with, right? The MAGA folks, they've been talking a lot about China and great power competition. What I think is remarkable right now is the silence that I've seen from China, from Russia, right? This axis, they're stunned. So it's not just that the United States has thwarted the nuclear program. And we are seeing, by the way, Pete Hegseth and J.D. Vance, they're all saying the same thing, that the nuclear program is gone. But I have to ask right now, what are the knock-on effects, the salubrious effects of this attack? does it begin to curb the enthusiasm of the revisionists? And that, I think, is a fascinating thing, because if that plays out in a positive way, then I think Israel and the United States will be justified on more than one level. It's not just that they removed that nuclear threat from Iran. Maybe, just maybe, and again, we need to wait and see here, but maybe it begins to roll back this sense of inevitable growth on the part of this axis that we've been trying to contain.
So I'd like to, and Abe, maybe you can chime in here. I'd like to sort of separate out these two strands of opposition to American action at the present moment, sort of ideologically. You have the restrainers that we're talking about. The key intellectual figure among the restrainers is Elbridge Colby, who is, I guess, head of policy planning now at the Defense Department. Is that right? Do I have his right?
No, I'm very sympathetic to Elbridge Colby. I read his book on Taiwan. I love his main point that if Taiwan remains as weak-wristed, weak-kneed, passive with regard to its own fate, then Americans shouldn't die and America shouldn't suffer billions of dollars in damage trying to fight to protect Taiwan. If Taiwan is too gutless and too weak and too scared and too much of a pussy to bother defending itself, which right now, that's what it looks like, right? Taiwan is absolutely pathetic in its unwillingness to make the most minor of sacrifices to defend itself. So I think Elbridge Colby is absolutely right. America should not be going out there defending weak-wristed, wimpy, pussy nations like Taiwan that don't have the balls to stand up for themselves, right? If Taiwan won't take its own side in a fight, well, then screw them. Americans shouldn't die to protect Taiwan. On the other hand, Taiwan might decide to sack up, to grow a pair, and to take its own side in a fight. And if so, then I'd be quite open to America assisting Taiwan. I'm quite open to Elbridge Colby keeping the focus of American military resources on our greatest geostrategic rival, China, and not sending everything to the Middle East to help Israel. Right? America should be for America primarily. I love how the pro-Israel crowd has, such as Yoram Hazony, the nationalist pro-Israel crowd has become increasingly sophisticated and increasingly nationalistic and recognizing and just outright stating, being more honest, being more open and saying, yeah, America and Israel have somewhat different interests and America should prioritize American interests and Israel should prioritize Israeli interests. And I'm quite open to Elbridge Colby wanting to hold back a whole bunch of resources from the Middle East, right, to focus on American interests blocking China.
He's
Undersecretary for Policy.
Undersecretary for Policy. Okay, so he wrote a book about this. He said, we need to basically pull out of Europe or stop caring much about Europe, focus on the Chinese threat. Although even there, the Chinese threat, if China were actually to move on Taiwan, he's not sure we could do anything about it.
If Taiwan's too wimpy to take its own side in the fight with China, if Taiwan's willing to make minor sacrifices to defend itself against China, then screw Taiwan. All right, Taiwan's not worth one American fingernail if Taiwan's unwilling to take their own side.
That's one strain. That strain is not the liberal collectivist strain. That strain dates back, if you were to take Bridge Colby, seriously, or assume that he was speaking in an American voice that needs to be taken seriously. That strain is the farewell address of George Washington. Beware of entangling alliances. We are a purer, better.
Is that a stupid, dishonorable, vicious, disgusting, bad strain? Right? It's a very formidable way of thinking that has many advantages and is the best way to go in many situations.
Better, more noble place. We do not want to turn into Europe. So we're better, and the world will.
Right. I feel like the world is a safer, more prosperous, more optimistic, happier place because Iran has been humiliated. Right. You follow one YouTube channel, you follow one streaming channel about war, such as this recent war between Israel and Iran. Follow the enforcer.
Allegedly agreed to a ceasefire, so Israel decided, let's go in and start heavy bombing Tehran like we've never done before and start leveling the place. And it looks like the damage was quite severe, and Tehran was getting absolutely hammered literally right after the ceasefire announcement. So that was a bit of an odd start by Israel. Not a great decision since they just agreed to a ceasefire, but let's take a look at some of our footage here and see what was happening literally right after the ceasefire agreement was announced by the United States president. And you can see there a massive explosion right there in central Tehran. You can see there's the smoke from it, and there's the huge flash right at the very beginning, a massive explosion, and that was launched by Israeli airstrike. So quite interesting to see that, and also quite a massive attack indeed that we saw right there. But let's take a look at our second video of another attack in the same area. And you can see right here in the second piece of footage, there's a huge fireball out there in the distance right in this town view right here. And you can see it is glowing extremely bright, and that's a massive explosion, whatever was hit out there in the distance. So that was a secondary Israeli airstrike near Karaj and also near Tehran. So these are huge strikes that were happening right after the ceasefire agreement was announced. So that caught people a little off guard and also created some confusion with us as well, because we were thinking, you know, why would Israel start attacking like this if a ceasefire was actually about to be in effect? Why would they start attacking like this? It made no sense, but they did it anyway, and apparently it went against the president's guidance from the United States because it made him extremely angry, and he got very, very volatile on camera about this situation that Israel pulled off right here. So moving into our next post, this one goes to Status 6 military and conflict news. And believe it or not, Israel was not done yet. They even started another round of strikes on Tehran after they finished that first one we just watched. They started a brand new round of humongous strikes on Tehran. So let's take a look at this video and see the air defense fire and also the Israeli airstrikes continuing on the Iranian capital. So right there you can hear huge explosions out there in the distance, and you can see in the sky there's a lot of sparks and flashes as well that you can see right out there. So absolutely a melee in Tehran after the ceasefire was announced, and really massive explosions. And in fact, these were larger than most of the ones we had seen previously that Israel was conducting during the actual 12-day war that was going on. So quite crazy to see right here. And once again, here's another footage showing these airstrikes. So with that, jumping into our next article here, this one goes to Disclosed TV. And then after that, we saw that Iran launched a bunch of ballistic missiles at Israel. And then we saw all these right here, all these alerts popping up literally everywhere. Tel Aviv, all over the populated areas. I believe Iran did deny firing missiles, but, you know, obviously the alerts didn't pop up for no reason. At this point, though, I want to make this clear. The ceasefire was actually in effect at this point when Iran launched these missiles. Their ceasefire had already gone into effect. So, essentially, Iran was the first one to break it. Israel was not really breaking the ceasefire yet, because when they attacked Iran, the ceasefire was not in effect. But at the point Iran attacked, the ceasefire was in effect, and they were the first ones to break the ceasefire.
So when things are going down and you want to turn to a live streaming source, the Enforcer, best channel to do that. All right, this story of Joe Biden, family man, one of the false narratives of our time.
So for me, the original sin was running in the first place.
Oh, well, yes, I've heard you talk about this because
his family was in crisis.
Right, because his daughter and his son were addicted to drugs.
I followed that Hunter Biden trial soup to nuts. I read every single transcript. I read all of the testimony. I cannot believe to this day, Jake, that Hunter Biden, that Joe Biden did this to his kids.
So somebody close to the family
can't believe that he did it.
Somebody close to the family told us, and this is in the book, that everybody knows, you know, some of the family aphorisms like, you know, my word is a Biden, or, you know, et cetera, et cetera. A lesser known Biden family saying is don't call a fat person fat. And by that they mean it's not about politeness. It's about hiding truths, not acknowledging truths. And this person close to the family suggested that there are lots of truths that the family did not want to face up to. One, Bo is dying. Mm-hmm. Two, Hunter is addicted to drugs. Three, Joe Biden cares about his family more than he cares about anything else. Mm-hmm. And those three are not true. This person close to the family said. And that's when you talk about his running in 2020, I think that comes to bear because obviously he was putting his ambition and, if you want to be charitable, his hopes to save the country from Trumpism or whatever, obviously he was putting that above what was going on with his family and his two children.
Now, I read the Jake Tapper book. It is a fun read, right? Very well written.
And their struggles.
Look, I mean, you know, you and I covered, you know, for most of our professional lives, the story of Joe Biden was this guy cared about his family so much he commuted home every night from Washington.
Now, by the way,
you know what else you could say is this man was so ambitious that after his family went through that tragedy, he commuted every day to work. Right. Like it's the same story.
He had his
narrative.
Had his sister help raise his boys.
I sit here, I look at this, and And I think, were we sold a 40-year bill of goods?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Is to say that the strike
This is from Sunday.
by the United States and the strikes, plural, by Israel have not destroyed the Iranian nuclear program. I'm sorry. It takes more than enriched uranium to have a program, right? The Iranians can have this enriched uranium in a truck and drive it all around central Iran, but without the facilities, without the tunnels, without the scientists, without the launchers, and without the missiles, there is no real program. Now,
so Matthew Continetti is really fair-minded. He's a traditional National Review Republican, but he's very fair-minded to the Christopher Caldwell, Steve Saylor, more distant side of the right.
I'm not saying that we shouldn't care about fissile material just running around a country, because you don't know who the Iranians might give it to. You don't know who might capture it. But I think we need to make this distinction between the stockpile of uranium and the actual program.
This guy is consistently head and shoulders above everyone else on this podcast. Right, National Review Republican, but unbelievably fair to right-wing dissidents.
It's part of the program, but there are a lot of other parts of the program that Israel and the United States have now destroyed, which set back the Iranian bomb by a long time.
This is so important because, look, I wouldn't know anything about this except that one had to learn about this in between 2013 and 2015 as the negotiations that led to the JCPOA were taking place. And so a lot of us had to bone up on what it meant, what centrifuges were, what it meant to have, how you milled uranium, how you converted it into, you enriched it over time and all of that. And the central point here is that whatever uranium is there, it is not bomb level. If it were, the Iranians would have announced that they had achieved a nuclear breakout and would have forestalled this attack by the very fact that they had gone nuclear. That's the Ben Rhodes idiocy, is that we can't just bomb North Korea now. I mean, we can, but I mean, you have to be mindful of the fact that there is a potentially emotionally unstable person with nuclear weapons in North Korea.
So I recently read a well-reviewed book that came out last year about what would happen if there was a nuclear war, the devastating results, and the whole premise of the book is that North Korea fires off one nuclear missile from a submarine and attacks the nuclear reactor in California, and then fires off ICBM from North Korea, taking out Washington, D.C., and ends life as we know it. Right? The world would be a much better place if North Korea had never been allowed to develop a nuclear weapons program.
Who could do something if you go at him. That's why he has them. That's why Iran wanted to have them, not only defensively, but offensively against Israel. That material is useless until it gets to weapons grade. And it's useless after it gets to weapons grade if it cannot be placed in certain types of containers that can be placed in certain types of rockets so that when the rocket is launched, it does not ignite the nuclear material inside the rocket. It's shielded from the heat of the rocket so that it doesn't blow up on launch and kill everybody in Tehran. So if you destroy the facilities that make the equipment that not only get it to weapons grade, those are the centrifuges, but...
So the book I was referring to is Nuclear War, a Scenario by N.E. Jacobsen. Spellbinding, chilling, fast read. And it's all about a North Korean attack on the United States.
The facilities that are making the casings and that are constructing the bombs and that are finessing the launchers, the uranium itself is meaningless. I mean, it's not meaningless because you could sell it to North Korea and give them
radioactive,
more.
right?
Yeah, radioactive, and therefore it's dangerous to them. If they have it on a truck driving it around somewhere or in some facility, whoever is there is going to get radiation poisoning and die.
Well, but we should add, though, with that point that, one of the concerns that people who were against a strike had was that, if we hit these facilities with these massive ordnance weapons, that then there will be these giant radiation leaks. But that has not been detected.
First of all, that has not been detected. And again, I think it goes to a misunderstanding of what this stuff is. It's not like, dynamite. where if you like, or it's not like, you're lighting, it's a quicksand.
Right. It's really weird not to be thrilled with what Donald Trump has done here. Right. There's something off if it holds up that you can't celebrate.
Open to the prospect of some sort of agreement, which critics said was pretty similar to where Obama ended up with his agreement. Now, some of those critics were Obama people who said, why did he get rid of an agreement only to head towards something similar? And some of the critics were from the right who said, this is like the Obama agreement and we can't have an agreement like that because it's not safe. Every president has worried about Iran. And no one, with the exception of Barack Obama with that deal, has done anything about it. Donald Trump did. Now, this deal, again, may not hold, but this was classic Trump. He said to the Iranians, make a deal or you will pay a price. Classic Trump, lots of coordination with Netanyahu. No one has reported that story out, and that's an incredible story that we'll see how long it stays a secret, but lots of coordination with the Israelis for a long period of time, not just during the operation of the last week. Donald Trump acted. He acted decisively, and he acted with a purpose. It wasn't to start a war. It wasn't to say, let's bomb Iran, cause regime change, send American forces in, build them schools and hospitals and roads, win over.
Right now, it looks like Donald Trump did a stunning, amazing, fantastic, world-changing, history-changing thing.
The hearts and minds of the Iranian people. That's not what he was trying to do. You cannot deny that what Donald Trump has done, knowing that we don't know the full consequences, was to solve a problem that has bedeviled the United States and Israel and the world for decades. That's pretty good, to solve a problem that the other presidents wanted to solve and couldn't. If you need a history lesson on Iran, you should know that the Iranians have said they're going to develop this capability and they're going to use it and they're going to destroy Israel. And they have the capability to destroy lots of other places by taking their nuclear technology, marrying it up to their ballistic missile technology. This is not a joke. This is not a fight over whether Harvard should get a grant. And I'm not saying that's a joke, but this is a life and death, existential stakes. This is a big thing. If you ask every president since Clinton, what were the biggest things that worried you? What were the biggest responsibilities on your shoulders, heavy burden? I'm confident that they'd all list at the top or near the top Iran's capacity to have a nuclear weapon, okay? Democrats in the last few days leading up to President Trump's military.
There's something weird broken in you if you are not rejoicing at the destruction and humiliation of the Iranian nuke-seeking terror regime.
Strike over the weekend, after his military strike, have been out of their minds in saying that Donald Trump wasn't adhering to the Constitution. Now,
and if your biggest opposition to what Donald Trump did in bombing Iran is because he didn't follow certain protocols and process, that is incredibly unhuman. It's just incredibly bizarre. It's not something that most people can relate to. You are at war with reality if you're infuriated or you oppose Donald Trump smashing Iranian nuclear reactors because he didn't follow a certain protocol that no American president has followed in the last 50 years. Give me a break. If you're lost in the process, you're at war with reality here. Sometimes process is more important than the outcome. Here, the outcome is far more important than the process.
Make no mistake. Technically, they're right. But we haven't had a president adhere to the Constitution on war powers since the War Powers Act passed. Because after Vietnam, the Congress said the president had too much power to make war. He wasn't adhering to the fact that war making is supposed to rest with the Congress. And so they passed the War Powers Act, and they tried to use the War Powers Act to restrain subsequent presidents. None of them have felt restrained in either party. And so part of why what Democrats are saying now in the wake of Donald Trump's use of military force without congressional authorization is how dare he, forgetting that they allowed Barack Obama to do it. Now, to their credit, there are some principled members of Congress in both parties who, regardless of whether the president's of their party or not.
All right, Thomas Massie, Rand Paul, Tucker Carlson, this whole automatically anti-interventionist wing look like idiots. And to just take a blanket position, we're not going to intervene, is a ridiculous position. You want to intervene strategically, wisely, appropriately. Right now, the evidence looks overwhelming that Trump did the right thing.
Has said, no, they cannot act unilaterally. They must come to Congress if they're going to initiate hostile military actions. But it hasn't worked. They're not in the majority. They're not in the majority in Congress. They're not in the majority in the country. Partisanship. There's a phrase, partisanship should stop at the water's edge. That on matters of national security, people should have a higher bar for when they act in a partisan way. And unfortunately, whether you want to mark the beginning of the partisan era in which we are now, hyper-partisan, you want to...
Right. Most of the major Democrats and elite media look like absolute idiots here in their opposition and denigration of what Bibi Netanyahu and Donald Trump accomplished.
Market to the Robert Bork hearings during Reagan. You want to market to the way Democrats were treated when Bill Clinton was president by Republicans. You want to market to the rise of talk radio or cable news. But we have had for decades now a system where the incentives for the loudest and angriest voices is to dominate the national town square on both sides, because you get rich that way, you get power in Congress, you get followers on social media. It's a messed up process. And many people in my business and politics say, well, that's where we are. That's where we are. We're just going to be like that as a country. I haven't thought that. I haven't thought that since the Clinton era, when I was covering the White House and covering the Clinton administration, and said, well, it shouldn't be like this. Certainly we should have robust political discussions. Certainly it's not as bad as it was when we had an actual civil war. But for matters, for instance, of national security, when the president does something that pretty much everyone in politics and much of the country agrees with, well, that should be applauded, shouldn't it? There was a brief moment like that after.
There's something really weird if you can't applaud what appears to have been accomplished here by Donald Trump in bombing the Iranian nuclear reactors.
Laptop was disinformation. How did that work out for you? Again, it's now been matched by many others. It doesn't mean it's true. I think people who don't like President Trump, or people who are familiar with President Trump's tendency to exaggerate and sometimes not tell the truth, might say, well, of course, this report is true. And maybe it is. I'd be curious to know what the Israelis say, where the Israelis have made it clear that they're not going to stop until they've succeeded. I'll be curious to know if there are going to be talks. The politics of this. The president has been criticized by Democrats for not engaging in enough consultation. Let's go to the next video, although this is pretty compelling. Here he is with the king and queen. Noah, what color is the queen?
So who has Trump been talking to the last 24 hours? The head of NATO and the leader of Turkey. All right, there's going to be new Middle East. There's going to be jointly run by the United States, Turkey, and Israel. They're going to have their different spheres of influence, but they should all be able to cooperate, get along, and be prosperous and live at peace.
Queen wearing there. Is that mustard? What is that? Canary?
Greenish.
The Democrats aren't used to winning. Next screen, please. He attacks some other members of Congress, talks about Joe Biden in the auto pen. Next screen, please. And says, Chuck Schumer, whose career is definitely on very thin ice. She and the Democratic friends have just hit the lowest poll numbers in congressional history. So go ahead and try impeaching me again. Make my day. A lot of Democrats now are going to be raising this issue of whether it was worth it because of the reports that it only set the program back a little bit. We're not going to solve that tonight, but we'll talk about that in a minute with our guest. Here's a tweet from Dean Phillips, number 14. You recall the Minnesota congressman was the only person to challenge Joe Biden for the nomination besides Bobby Kennedy, who left the party. And Dean Phillips says this: Democrats wishing to lose the 26 midterms should promote a 33-year-old socialist devoid of executive experience for mayor of America's largest city and impeach a president who ended a tyrannical regime's nuclear threat while achieving a ceasefire days later. Again, Dean Phillips' tweet, very popular with certain people in my circle. I was probably sent it by 40 different people. But he says eliminate. And of course, now other Democrats at least will be bringing up the question of whether it was eliminated. I'll say again, let's see what the other intelligence agencies say. They don't always agree. All right. Again, if you want to be in on the conversation, please raise your hand. Moisture and heat from your body. And
of course, so it really depends over what you're negotiating over. Forgive me if I missed any from before, but is it negotiating over how to ensure regime survival? Is it negotiating over what's left of their nuclear program? Or is it negotiating over a potentially new regional posture involving Iran? They all are intertwined here because U.S. military action and an Israeli military action, which came under the umbrella of trying to stop a potentially nuclear armed Islamic Republic of Iran, also touched those other elements about the regime's potential different regional posture, its apparatus of foreign aggression and domestic suppression, and even threatened by highlighting how weak it is, its hold on power. So those are all valid questions to ask.
Yep, absolutely. Brilliantly said. Now, here's a question that I've been wondering about, and I'm glad you're back because I didn't ask you last time. Iran, it's been widely reported in the Western media and in Israel, warned the U.S. and Qatar that they were going to bomb these, shoot missiles at these bases. So I mean, it was all kabuki. They said, get ready, here it comes, here's where it's coming. They've lost, regardless of how much the nuclear program has been degraded, they've lost a number of their top military officials, scientific officials. They've lost control of their airspace. People say that this is, in the normal course thing, this would be humiliating. Do people in Iran know this? Do they have access to this media? Do they know that their country is lost or not?
Well, increasingly, the country has been subject to a whole series of rolling and then sometimes national internet restrictions or internet blackouts, like us, for example, trying to look inward, looking at Iranian websites, looking at websites that have .ir domains, for example, have not been able to, for a significant portion of this conflict, been able to access those websites. And we're on the outside. So imagine the more tightly controlled flow of information on the inside. The escape hatch to that is the virtual private networks or the VPNs that allow Iranians to connect to the outside world. And of course, the significant Iranian usage of social media platforms like Telegram and Instagram, for example, where they can communicate with one another and share information. If you are, though, I'm just saying on balance, if you are a citizen, a resident living in the Islamic Republic of Iran, your basic run-of-the-mill average Iranian, even though that's not a monolith, a country of 90+ million people, you already know how incompetent your government is, and this is a tier 3 type of government. So it creates that expectation gap between the kind of government they deserve versus the kind of government they have, and the places that the regime has been spending on and what they have to show for it.
I was surprised at how incompetent Iran was in this war with Israel, and I was surprised at how brilliant Israel was.
So it intensifies a train of thought, a school of thought that already exists in Iranian society, which is this government isn't worth its salt.
Okay, I'm going to get to your questions in a minute. So again, if you want in on the conversation, please raise your hand. Socials or the people would say, let's trade the effort to build nuclear capability for integration into the world order.
Well, that latter part we have to disaggregate, because integration into the world order, regardless of your view, your disposition on is the regime good or bad inside of Iran, lots of Iranians desire a better life, and that better life they see through the prism of integration. This isn't the 1980s or 90s where they're puritanical about it, but this is the debate in the population. So largely within the population, we're saying this anecdotally based on people who have come and gone and acquaintances, as well as most importantly, the nature of the evolving social media debate in Iran, which is just one measure. It's not a perfect measure. These are the things you hear and see. Let me tell you even beforehand, like before we got into this shooting war, how you could tell, or what the measure was that the Iranian population saw the ineffectiveness of their military being tied to the larger themes of the ineffectiveness and the incompetence of the Iranian government. You may remember the first kind of open Israel-Iran exchange was in April 2024.
Right. Who would want to be ruled by this cruel, incompetent regime?
Then the Iranians sent a bunch of drones. Do you guys remember that those drones took like 9 hours or 7 hours to reach their destination, and ultimately every single drone was shot down before entering Israeli airspace? Remember that?
Yes, sir.
And then that was in April. In the month of May, you may remember that the Iranian president, Ibrahim Raisi, his helicopter crashed in northwestern Iran. They said it was cloud cover. Some people thought it was a foreign sabotage. Some people thought it was domestic sabotage. What have you? The Iranian president's helicopter crashed. And it took about 9-10 hours to have official confirmation from Iran that this guy had died and that the helicopter had indeed crashed. Right. The Iranian population, again, on these same platforms, were making a consistent reference to a joke. And that joke was the ability of the government to even confirm the news of the death of the president takes as long to reach us as it takes the drones to reach Israel. They're making light of these situations. This is one anecdotal measure, but this is a measure that...
Right. What normal Iranian is going to feel great pride and great loyalty to such an incompetent government?
Comes up time and time again in jokes, in memes, in casual conversation that you see represented and really proliferating across the Persian language social media space. I'm not saying, again, this is representative of everything, but it is representative of something.
Okay, one more question, and then again, we're going to go to the community. Within the Iranian government, we talk about the Ayatollah, and we know that others, senior people that were killed by Israel. Are there people within senior positions who could urge the Ayatollah to negotiate and give up the program? Are there people who could be in the government who could form the organizational structure for some sort of attempt to overthrow the Ayatollah, or that doesn't exist?
If they exist in the government, or if they exist in the armed forces, or if they exist in the national security apparatus, they haven't been known, they haven't been named, and they may not be prominent individuals, because at least in their public commentary and in their public disposition, as well as what is leaked about the orientation and views of some of these people, there is no daylight there. There are people within the broader category of regime elites who aren't for fully trading this away, but they offer a different style of engagement with the West, just to win sanctions relief, or just to buy time, or just to facilitate the expansion of the Iranian nuclear program, but in a way that is drastically safer than the way that's been, kind of expanded under the cover of the international community with two eyes deep on the prize. I want to stress this, though, which is the main decision maker still is someone named Ali Khamenei. He's an 86-year-old ideologue who, unfortunately, even from somewhere deep in his bunker in Tehran or Labastan or Mashhad or wherever his bunker was, he played to the edge deep in that bunker. That shows you something. He was still willing, even though, as you mentioned, he gave a heads up, the Iranian government gave a heads up about the missiles coming, he was still willing to fire ballistic missiles, weapons of war, that can go across the Persian Gulf in about 6 to 8 minutes with moderately sized warheads at the largest American military installation. And the narrative that he is selling about his resolve or will to fire these things is that I fired missiles at the biggest American military base, and America offered us a ceasefire. So even if there are some people on the sidelines who may be saying this in private and we have no idea who they are.
Right. The Iranian regime looks like a paper tiger, right? Just filled with noise and fury and bluster, but not much substance. And they just got absolutely smashed in this war with Israel.
These guys, particularly the most important decision makers who set the agenda, they are drinking.
Has anyone checked in on Rodney Martin? Is he okay? Right, Rodney Martin often appears on Iranian TV. He's quite pro-Iran, quite hostile to Israel. Regular on the show, someone I'm on quite friendly terms with.
Their own Kool-Aid.
Right.
And they are bringing this great country towards more ruin.
Mitch McConnell on the Senate side, Paul Ryan and Kevin McCarthy on the House side. I think it's fair to say they were failures at understanding how to work with Trump. They didn't lose every time, but they didn't stand good terms with him. And in the case of two of them, they lost their jobs, Ryan and McCarthy. Mm-hmm. What is it about John Thune and Mike Johnson, who on the face of it, to me, would not be Trump whisperers, right? They're not. They have no kid. They've never like owned a casino in Atlantic City. They've, I don't believe either of them's been married 3 times. Like, they're not like stylistically like Trump. You wouldn't think they'd long to be at Mar-a-Lago. How have these two guys, start with Thune in the Senate, how have these two guys figured out how to master Trump?
I actually want to start with Johnson, if you don't mind, because I think he learned a valuable lesson from his predecessors, and that Paul Ryan, who I covered, his speakership and Donald Trump's first administration and their relationship pretty closely. And Ryan was like very dismissive of Trump. He wasn't always dismissive in public, but like the way he talked to the president, the president could tell. Ryan, obviously, policy wonk, tax nerd, knew what he wanted to do and thought he was right, and it didn't matter what Trump wanted. He was trying to sort of find a way to manipulate Trump to get what he wanted. So that didn't work, right? The MAGA wing hated him. He ends up retiring because he's basically loathed in the party. McCarthy did the opposite. McCarthy was smart in that he was one of the first GOP leaders in Washington to say, look, this guy is going to be the nominee, whether you like him or not. In 2016, you need to rally behind him. He helped connect President Trump with then candidate Trump with fundraisers in the area to raise him a lot of money to try to help him win. He was the ultimate person who showed loyalty at a time when candidate Donald Trump needed it, and he won a lot of favor because of that. But McCarthy became too cocky. Okay, he made promises to Donald Trump that he did not keep, including that he would expunge his impeachment record when he became speaker. That was actually really important to Donald Trump, and Trump asked him about it all the time. McCarthy kept blowing him off, and ultimately Trump said, well, screw you, in comes Matt Gaetz, and goodbye, McCarthy. I think Speaker Johnson has sort of found a sweet spot here, right? He has a policy vision the way that, Speaker Ryan did, and the relationship that McCarthy had as well, but he's not getting too cocky in that relationship. He knows that he always has to get Donald Trump on board. He's made sure that he has a good relationship with him and that he's talking with him frequently, and that he's running everything by him. And, it's been surprising to me with Johnson because, you go back 6 months ago, Mark, and I was hearing from people very close to Donald Trump that they were having second thoughts about whether they wanted him as speaker. Yeah. It was after the whole, continuing resolution government funding thing totally blew up in Johnson's face. The president was upset that it did not raise the debt ceiling and deal with that.
Elon Musk could have had a great relationship with the most powerful man in the world, the president of the United States. But in his, I assume, drug-induced fervor, in his emotional, psychological, personal instability, right, he had to lash out and burn and deeply damage his relationship with Donald Trump. But Mike Johnson, John Thune, right, they are incredibly effective at working with Trump.
Issue. Johnson was able to sort of worm himself back into the good graces of Donald Trump, surprising a lot of people who are very close to him. And I mean, you see it whenever President Trump talks about Johnson, you can actually just see the level of admiration he has for him. He praises him all the time, says nobody could do the job, which I'm not sure I agree with. No one else could do the job. I think Jim Jordan could probably do the job. But you can just see it. He just loves the guy. I think John Thune.
Before you get to Thune,
please.
My favorite Johnson-Trump moment of late was when Trump was praising him the way you said he does, and he said he's a man of God, and he's like, "Well, I'm a man of God too, but he's really a man of God." I think Trump's fascinated by how religious Johnson is. But just one more question about John, then I want to hear from you on Thune. Is Johnson now on solid footing? Well, can he make mistakes and Trump will forgive him, or he's basically one strike and you're out, and they could turn back on it?
No, I think he's bought himself some real political capital with the president. Yeah. I mean, a lot of us, myself included, thought his whole promise to pass this big, beautiful bill by Memorial.
I've been nothing but admiring of Mike Johnson with such a tiny majority ever since he became the Speaker of the House. I'm just astounded, blown away, and I just get a good feeling when I see the guy on TV. He radiates a genuine religiosity, a genuine centeredness, a genuine spirituality. He seems quite amiable. It just gives me a good feeling to hear the guy talk, to see the guy. He's an incredibly canny player and seems like a great bloke.
Real day was like totally a pipe dream. It was never going to happen. I mean, we were expecting this to go at least until August, if not, through recess into September, and he did it. And I think that obviously Donald Trump he couldn't have done it without Donald Trump, whipping the votes. But I think, that has bought him some political capital. I will say one thing, and that is there are a lot of Johnson critics right now who are silent. They're not out there, fomenting, opposition to him, but they would love to see him fall on his face. And frankly, I have heard people say that if this bill falls through, that there could be a move against Johnson, that they could try to vacate him.
Right. I love when we create healthy incentives. All right. Right now, there are healthy incentives for Republicans to align behind Mike Johnson, John Thune, and Donald Trump. I love that natural supporters of terror and genocide, right, are experiencing considerable incentives to dial it down right now. That's one of the wonderful things that comes about when you drop a few bombs on a genocidal regime like Iran. It encourages healthy incentives, right? The Japanese were, bloodthirsty, warlike, vicious killers. You drop a couple of nuclear bombs on them, and they're like the sweetest people in the world now.
I'm just very skeptical of it because I think that, at least right now, he's in President Trump's good graces, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're right. Other people might be able to do the job, but we've seen from the last couple of rounds of speaker voting, it's not clear that anybody else can get the job. It's not clear that anybody else has enough votes within the House conference to get it. Now, the Johnson-Trump relationship has been pretty public. They've done a lot of events together. Johnson goes to Mar-a-Lago. I can count on the fingers of one hand the number of times I remember seeing him with John Thune on camera. So what's up with those two, and how has that relationship been built, and how does it stand now?
It's a little chillier, I would say. I mean, John Thune has done a lot to try to, rehabilitate his own image in Donald Trump's mind.
So John Thune is the Senate Majority Leader.
I mean, obviously he was a critic of...
I think I first heard him in 2002. Was that when he was first elected to the U.S. Senate? Because talk show host Hugh Hewitt, one of the most responsible, respectable, admirable right-wing talk show host, was always talking up John Thune.
Of Trump after January 6th, wanted the party to move on. He didn't support Trump during the primary. He supported Tim Scott. So he did have some work to do, and his people were very, they knew that. They knew that going into this race. And, he was up against, John Cornyn, who was a member of leadership, also sort of GOP establishment, but had a little better relationship with Donald Trump, and Rick Scott, who was MAGA all the way, big Trump ally, but Rick Scott was never going to win that job. But I think John Thune did what he needed to do. He sort of bent the knee. He, told the president, we're not going to agree on everything, but, I know you're the one who, had this historic victory, and you're the one people voted for, so I'm going to defer.
So how long till we get the big, beautiful bill? All right, geostrategic political analyst George Friedman used to be a mentor and a boss to Peter Zion. He weighs in favor of what Donald Trump did in Iran.
Of the Iranian government. It operates inside Iran, along with a whole group of other Islamic terrorist groups. 9/11 was a suicide attack by pilots hijacking American aircraft. Assume for the moment that the Iranians got a nuclear weapon. Nuclear weapons can be delivered in a number of ways. You don't need missiles. You can, for example, put them on boats. Boats can carry them, not that heavy. Imagine a nuclear missile being delivered to New York Harbor on a boat with a flag of, say, Britain or any other country, and sailing in there. So there is and this is a very outside chance, okay? But the reality is that we had gone through this sort of event with Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is close to Iran. It is in Iran. In the event that nuclear weapons are created, the idea was that the United States had nothing at risk. In fact, it had a long shot at risk, a long shot that if it came true would be catastrophic. So I think that it was likely that the United States did not want this particular country to have nuclear weapons given the past, and therefore the strike was highly likely. The Israelis took out air defenses, they did all the things. The one thing they could not do is take out the nuclear capabilities that we're developing. We did that.
Okay, given that and the potential harm or risk that was facing the United States, I mean, what's changed, do you think, over the last couple of weeks in terms of Trump was very keen on negotiation, but he was kind of keeping everyone guessing? Do you think this was always part of the plan? Do you think that really he just wanted to see how it played out?
No, I think he was very serious about negotiating with the Iranians. The Iranians, I think, miscalculated, and they thought they could stretch out these negotiations. For internal political reasons, the Ayatollah didn't want to abandon this. It didn't want to show publicly that it had dissuaded the United States. And therefore, when we take a look at this, we were in negotiations conducted in Oman through the Omani government. They were not willing to meet face-to-face. We'd offer that. So I think the negotiations took place, and it was determined that they were not going to give. The law was that we'll give them another 2 weeks to come across it.
And I guess I suppose as well, what we're seeing now, which will be interesting to see where this plays out from here, but just looking at this, I mean, if we look at we take a step back and see how we got here in terms of Israel beginning this attack, is there a chance here, or do you think that actually what was going on here. We've got two countries with very different goals in this conflict, the US and Israel. We know Israel has talked repeatedly about wanting regime change. The US has said it's not after that, it's just looking at the nuclear side of things. How does that work?
Well, for Israel, the fundamental issue is that after the attack by Hamas, Israel determined that it was at fundamental risk by very small groups of drawing it into war, and they decided to redefine the Middle East. We have to remember there are many countries, Arab countries, that are quite close and friendly to Israel. One of them is Saudi Arabia.
Right. Israel was fighting this incredible seven-front war, and slowly they've taken down all the Iranian proxies, and now they've destroyed Iran, which is going to reduce funding for Hezbollah, for Hamas, for the Houthis.
Arabia, for example. The other now is Syria has come back. So Israel is not isolated in the Middle East, but formal relations don't take place for ideological reasons and so on. Remember also, these countries like Saudi Arabia are quite afraid of the radical Islamists. They threaten those regimes as well. So from the Israeli point of view, given the fact that Iran was particularly involved in creating Hamas and arming it, they had a priority of not allowing these kind of attacks to happen again, not simply by making war all over the place, but by knocking Iran out of the game and making it easier for the Arab countries, the Islamic world, to make overt agreements with Israel. Saudi Arabia already has intelligence sharing, weapon sharing, all sorts of collaboration with Israel because their interest is against Iran and for the Israelis.
All right, looking at some posts on X, and I see one poll that puts the anti-Israel side of the MAGA coalition at about 6%. That seems right to me. All right, Thomas Keith is a must-follow on X. He says the next threshold, air power, is the last pillar that Iran's adversaries believe is too degraded right now to project dominance, but that gap is way too strategically exposed for China to ignore. So after absorbing a full-spectrum Israeli strike, and with Israel having unquestionable air supremacy for all 12 days of this war, right, Iran has shown it's got missile resilience, it's got drone depth, it's got command continuity, but its air layer is lightweight, and everyone sees it. So if Iran wants to close the triangle, missiles, drones, manned air power, China is the only partner willing to bridge that gap without strings. So if China gives Iran enough weapons, right, enough planes, would make Iran incredibly formidable. So integrate that with Chinese radar and Chinese long-range air-to-air missiles, right, and Iran will have parity over regional skies. Right, there's Chinese weaponry right now that will outrange anything that Israeli or American jets carry in the region. Right, this would make Iran very disruptive. So does China want to arm Iran? Why would they not? Israelis admit they have no ability to reliably interdict this Chinese supply chain to Iran without full escalation into a conflict with China. Right? Israel cannot disrupt the Chinese-Iran supply chain. Right? China can flood Iran with more missile propellant, drone engines, airplanes, radar, circuit boards, faster than Israeli sabotage can keep up. Right? Israel cannot win this supply chain war unless the United States chooses to openly confront Beijing, which is never going to happen. So right now, the only gap between Israel and Iran is in the air. Iran lacks a frontline fighter with real deterrent weight. If China decides to arm them, then all bets are off, and Iran would be an incredibly formidable adversary that only Israel's nuclear deterrent could keep in check. So certainly not game over yet. All right, this is the Free Press. I think this streamed June 23rd, so that's
dropping
yesterday.
of those bombs on Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz on Saturday night, New York time.
Well, it changed things profoundly, potentially in the region, and changed things irrevocably.
All right, this is Michael Oren an author and former Israeli ambassador to the United States.
Permanently in the international arena. And I'll explain. Let's start with the international arena. I think that after the United States, for the first time in the aftermath of the Iran and Afghani debacles, has demonstrated that it's willing to project power, to use power in a very forthright way and an effective way. And that people in Beijing are thinking in a different way tonight about whether the United States would intervene to prevent Taiwan from being invaded. I think people are thinking differently in Moscow tonight about whether they should accept President Trump's outstretched hand to mediate the Ukrainian issue war. That has changed, and there's no way back from that. In the region, I think we'll probably all agree that at some point this war is going to end around the negotiating table. And a lot of it's going to depend on America's position at that negotiating table. And I do a lot of Israeli media, and in all my appearances in Israeli media, I'm always urging us to give priority to coordinating our positions with the United States. We come to that negotiating table with a unified position. That unified position has to be not only the dismantlement of Iran's nuclear facilities, those that haven't been dismantled already, and the rescinding of its so-called right to enrich, but the end of Iran's role as the world's largest state sponsor of terror, the backer of Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, the constant
The Houthis are still going to be a pain. They're still going to be nigh unstoppable for many months to come.
Efforts to destroy us, to assassinate American leaders, to assassinate yours truly. I survived an Iranian assassination attempt. You can see I'm still sitting here. That could be a position that would be a game changer. And the game changer, Barry, would be meaning possibly peace between Israel and Lebanon, peace between Israel and Syria, if Syria coheres, peace certainly between Israel and Saudi Arabia, resolution of the Gaza situation, release of our hostages, some progress toward a diplomatic horizon for the Palestinians, and who knows, down the road, peace between Israel and Iran. That is a new age for the region. You saw a piece that I wrote earlier in the week. You were very kindly in posting it, where I said that Donald Trump could be the great peacemaker of the 21st century. But it requires a tremendous amount of backbone at that negotiating table and bringing around to that, and coordinated with the Israeli position as well. So I say potentially a game changer in the region already. It promises to be, but internationally, I think the gain has been irrevocable. America's in a different position today than it was a week ago.
The premise, of course, behind that beautiful vision you just laid out is the total dismantling of Iran's nuclear program. And I think the most urgent question that we woke up to today is the question of how much damage those bunker buster bombs actually accomplished. The initial message out of the White House was that this program had been completely and totally obliterated. The Pentagon Defense Chief Pete Hegseth briefed reporters on Sunday morning, and he said it was an incredible and overwhelming success. But the reality, Jay, as you report in our pages today, is a bit more complicated. You explain that, well, why don't you tell us what your reporting showed?
Well, I think that the bombings on Saturday, probably did destroy the ability of Iran to enrich uranium at Fordo, which was this underground facility, at Natanz, which was kind of the biggest enrichment site, and also the ability to convert nuclear materials at Isfahan. So I think when they describe that they've essentially destroyed Iran's capabilities in this site, even though battle assessments still need to be done, I think probably that's true. But the question the story really raised is, A, the Iranians have been pretty vocal since mid-May, late May, that they were going to move equipment, nuclear materials out of these sites. And we had this kind of interesting opening in the story today about cargo trucks moving up to Fordo at the end of last week. There's also reports of trucks moving around Isfahan, where probably most of the highly enriched uranium was being held. So there's immediate questions about, what happens to Iran's fissile material, its stockpile of highly enriched uranium. And Vice President Vance kind of raised that yesterday in some of his TV appearances, saying we need to find out where they are. Then the other question is, Iran has had this nuclear program going covertly since the late 90s. And there was almost always a very secretive part of this. And the Iranian officials have said publicly, we have a third site. They said that, I think, in late May. And people are trying to understand where that might be. I think the IAEA said this might have been buried around Isfahan as well. But the Iranians have dozens of nuclear sites in the country. When the Israeli Mossad stole this big warehouse of documents in 2018, they found dozens and dozens of sites. So I think the real question is, where are these stockpiles of highly enriched uranium, and are there other sites, particularly to enrich uranium, particularly to create uranium metal, which is used to create a nuclear warhead? And these can be housed in very small facilities. It's not like, the reason the program was so, in some ways, visible is that the cover was that they were producing nuclear fuel for reactors, which you need a lot of material. But if you just want enough fissile material to make weapons grade uranium, you can do that in very small sites. And I think there's going to be a lot of hunting, searching for where these other sites might be, if they're there, and where these stockpiles of highly enriched uranium are. So I think the hunt goes on. This cat and mouse game is probably continuing despite the destruction in a lot of ways of these major facilities.
One of the things, as you mentioned, Jay, that your report opens with is that the satellite images showed 16 cargo trucks over the course of 24 hours taking undisclosed material, unidentified material away from Fordo. And a lot of listeners are asking, how will we know, or when will we know, or does the US or Israel know, and they're not telling us, if the highly enriched uranium at Fordo was taken out before the attack? And how concerned should we be about that right now? Jay, I'll put that to you, and then Michael, if you want to jump in.
I mean, I think people should be really concerned about where these stockpiles are. I mean, it's conceivable the Israelis and the Americans kind of knew what was going on with these trucks, but there was also concerns about Isfahan, where sort of the majority of the highly enriched uranium was being stored and warehoused. So it's not just Fordo, it's Isfahan and potentially other sites where the fissile material would be moved, potentially some of the centrifuge equipment. So, you know, I don't think we'll know. I think there's a lot of hunting going on. U.S. and Israeli intelligence obviously is quite good. So maybe these 16 trucks weren't as big a concern and they decided not to strike, but it's also potential. You know, there was this kind of 24-hour window where I think the Israelis probably knew the U.S. was getting ready to attack Fordo. Did they not go then because they were kind of waiting? Those are questions that need to be asked. But I think it's Fordo, Isfahan, and other sites that people are really wondering, where did this fissile material go?
Well, right now, Amit Segal is reporting that the IDF is attacking entrances to Fordo in order to prevent, presumably, more material from being smuggled out. We also know, Michael, that the extent of Israel's campaign has widened beyond just the nuclear sites to regime sites. Give us the state of affairs, if you could, about Israel's strategy right now as we speak at 11 a.m. on Monday morning, New York time.
So I think this actually ties into the fate of the enriched material. You're talking about some 408 kilograms of enriched material to 60%, about 276 kilo of 20%. Each one is a small step away from 90%, which is fissile. And I'm not even sure, Jay, there's a way you can actually bomb it in a safe way without creating a mass casualty event. And the only way truly that material can be neutralized, and that is within parentheses, would be by extracting it, by sending it abroad in the way it was sent abroad previously. And that can, again, we go back to the negotiating table. And going back to the negotiating table, we once again ask the question, okay, who's coming to the other side of the negotiating table on the Iranian side? And that brings us to the change in Israel's bombing strategy as of this morning. And the recent statement by the White House, again, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, of saying we want regime change, and then most recently in the last hour saying we don't want regime change. So go find it. But whether, irrespective of what the White House is saying, the Israeli bombing pattern suggests regime change. It's not just that Netanyahu has called repeatedly for the Iranian people to rise up and throw off the oppressive yoke of the Ayatollahs. It's that, as of this morning, the Israeli Air Force started bombing, among other sites, the Evin prison, which the Evin prison is a horrendous source of torture and oppression for the regime. I actually have known some people who've been in prison there. And so it's a powerful, powerful symbol. They have bombed the headquarters of the Besiege. And for those of you listeners who don't know the Besiege, it's tens of thousands of thugs with baseball bats that if you raise your head up against the regime, they will knock you on that head and try to take it off. And bombing the Besiege headquarters is a symbol. It's a symbol of the regime. Israeli Air Force has also been taking out helicopters, other assets the regime has for oppression and for suppressing uprisings, such as the women's uprising of 2022. And so while there are differing estimates about the ability of opposition elements within Iran to organize, particularly in the absence of an internet system, they're there. And obviously, I think that Israel has had some assistance from opposition elements, perhaps also in the IRGC, certainly in the Army. The Army hates the IRGC. And so the question then is, if we're going to address many sticky issues like the fate of the 650 plus kilograms of enriched material, we're going to have to figure out who's going to come to the negotiating table. What's that position going to be? And if the Ayatollahs are back at the negotiating table, it's going to be one challenge. But if there's a different leadership, that challenge could be of a completely different order.
I want to get to the question of regime change and the politics of it, both here in America and also in Israel in a second. Let's stick on the nuclear question just for another minute, because there's just a ton of listener questions about it. Among them, is there any indication of radioactive fallout? Someone else asks, how reliable is American or Israeli intelligence on Iran's nuclear program, and which intelligence agency has the most reliable information? Maybe I'll pause there for a second on the question of which agency has the most reliable information. Bibi Netanyahu has given a few statements sort of winking and nodding at the idea that they have really interesting intelligence on X and Y and Z, sort of indicating that they have a lot of information. Michael, who should people look to? People that are curious to get the most accurate information. Which intelligence agency, Jay, would you say has the most reliable information right now?
Go ahead, Jay.
I mean, the amount of knowledge the Israeli government has on Iran's nuclear program is pretty amazing. I mentioned this 100,000 documents they stole from a warehouse in southern Tehran in 2018. That was really kind of the history of Iran's nuclear weapons research, something called the Ahmad Plan. And since then, they've shared this information with the IAEA, and sure enough, many of the sites that are mentioned, they've detected traces of fissile material there, equipment, and the Israelis' knowledge of the scientists and sort of the academics who have been the backbone of this effort is also pretty intense. I mean, they've said they've killed 10 nuclear scientists over the past 10 days, and many of them are also mentioned in this archive of information. So I think the knowledge of the program is pretty intense, but at the same time, there's always been a secretive element to it. You mentioned Fordo. One of the interesting things, if you track the history, the Iranian nuclear program really was exposed in 2002, particularly in Natanz, as being the main enrichment site. And at that point, they started to secretly build Fordo that was then exposed in 2009. So there always seems to be an effort to keep secret programs. So even as this knowledge is so intense and vast, there is a question, are there other sites that were secretly built? Because that has been...
My response might surprise you, Barry.
Go ahead.
You might surprise you. Listen, the U.S.-Israel intelligence relationship is the most intimate in the world. It surpasses any other bilateral intelligence relationship which the United States has with any other agency in Europe or elsewhere. I spent years in the most intimate conversations between the most senior Israeli representatives of the intelligence community and the most senior members of the American intelligence community. And the difference is not in the access to the Iranian nuclear program. It's the interpretation of what we see. And I can tell you unequivocally that we see the same things. We're looking at the same, say, aerial photographs. We're looking at the same material that we're getting from inside sources. It's the interpretation. So you have we have evidence that Iran is actually moving to make a nuclear weapon. Well, they may not actually have the smoking gun, but from Israel's interpretation, that if you see in Iran that it's enriching to 60%, you see that it is as Jay mentioned, the Ahmad program that was revealed in the material that was taken out of the Tehran nuclear archive by Mossad agents in 2018. You know that they are working on a warhead. You put that all together, and you have a picture which becomes increasingly clear of an Iran that's moving toward military nuclear capabilities. Now, is it a smoking gun? Do you actually say, has an order been given by the supreme leader to put this all together and make the nuclear warhead? No. America, I'm going to say something that's tautological. America's a big country. It's far away from the Middle East. It's not surrounded by enemies that want to destroy it. Israel's a small country, and we are threatened with national annihilation by proxies and by the Iranian country that operates them. So our margin for error on the nuclear issue is exactly zero. Exactly zero. And I want to quote an eminent source.
Right, that's a great point. Right, it's not just the information; it's the hero system or the situation that you find yourself in.
Well, I know that all of you know it's Yaakov Amidjor, who is the former national security advisor for the state of Israel, a person I have very high regard for. He had 4 lines that he used to give to our American counterparts at these discussions, and I want to quote him. He would say the following: "It's not yet, not."
Okay, the
line
breaks
I think
up.
it's right. I think in the story we say it's been probably put back months, if not years, as far as what we describe as the breakout time. If it really decided it wanted to produce weapons-grade uranium, how fast could they do it? Enough for a bomb. So it has been degraded, but I still think there are these stockpiles, there are these apparent other enrichment sites. Unless there's either a negotiated settlement, as Ambassador said, or there is extraction, there's still going to be a lot of concern about this nuclear program, and it will remain a threat for sure.
Okay, I want to kind of...
So Michael Oren went on Hugh Hewitt's show today.
We're at an historical inflection point. That's where we are. So looking backward, I'll say that never in the 77 years of Israel's existence has the United States joined openly with Israel in offensive operations, or in this case, counteroffensive operations. The United States has come to Israel's aid repeatedly in defensive capacities, taking down missiles, resupplying us, say, for example, during the Yom Kippur War, but never openly joined with us in countering a common enemy. And this is what happened this time. It's true. And certainly in this century, where the United States has been impeded by the trauma of Iraq and Afghanistan, before that of Vietnam, such a bold military move is quite a departure from longstanding American policy, one that has had far-reaching geopolitical global ramifications. I assure you, there are people in Beijing who are thinking now we have to pause and think twice before we can consider taking Taiwan. Even Moscow.
So, Dr. Oren, other than exhaustion, and I assume every Israeli who's been going to a shelter 3 times a night is exhausted for 2 weeks. Other than exhaustion, how do Israelis feel today?
guarded. Listen, the day began with a flagrant violation by Iran of the ceasefire. 5 people were killed in Beersheba, including the most beautiful couple you can ever imagine, young people. And then when our jets took to the air to retaliate, the president called them back. And so on one hand, we are profoundly grateful for President Trump of what he's done and how he's really been, what he did was a game changer. This war could have gone on for many weeks longer. As I mentioned in this program before, it's a war of attrition to see which side cried uncle first. And we were paying a very high price, psychologically, socially, financially. And the president ended all that, ended it swiftly.
All right, this is from the Times of Israel podcast, June 21, before Trump joined in the bombing.
Conference, Zamir said that Israel is not running low on air defense interceptors amid the conflict with Iran. And he denied reports that the IDF stockpile of interceptor missiles is being depleted. I mean, it is a finite amount, though, right, Manny? I mean, how many could we have? And we've been shooting off just hundreds in the past week, no?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this very carefully, just to avoid any problems. Israel planned this operation months in advance, right? In fact, it had been preparing years in advance to potentially attack Iran's nuclear facilities, but especially it began planning this in around October, November, basically during the war. So when Israel planned this operation, it knows how many ballistic missiles Iran has, 2,500 according to assessments. It knows how many drones it has. And during these preparations, the Israeli army stockpiled enough interceptors to handle the threat. When you plan such an operation, it's called a reference scenario of what could happen when we do X, Y, Z. And Israel anticipates that Iran would fire hundreds of ballistic missiles in its initial response to Israel. I saw even some reports saying 1,000, which I think maybe a bit much, but 500, 600 possibly. In reality, it fired only 100 in the initial response. And even at this stage in the operation, according to the IDF's initial assessments, it's actually running through fewer interceptors than it had anticipated ahead of the operation. So not only is Israel not running through all the interceptors that it had prepared ahead of time, is actually going through fewer of them than it had anticipated.
A little bit more from Michael Oren.
If this is navigated successfully, everything in the Middle East can change. If Iran is totally neutralized, I don't care, who comes to negotiation in Iran, and you have changed the entire region. You make it secure for us, secure for Americans, secure for the world. Our fear today, and I gotta be honest with you, is that Iran has announced today that it's going to start rebuilding its nuclear facilities and replenishing its missile arsenals. And Israel and the United States have to be on the same page, Hugh.
In worst case, best case, the poison tree that was pumping poison through its roots, through Lebanon, through Syria, through Gaza and the West Bank and Yemen and Iraq, has been cut off. And those roots will wither, and everyone will sit under their fig and tree and be happy. Worst case, the mullahs have a hidden facility. They're going to enrich rapidly, and they're going to deliver an unconventional, not very sophisticated bomb to your border somehow. Which is more likely?
Either one. A lot of it depends on how America handles this. It really is. The decision is in the hands of the President of the United States. The Iranians, as far as I can see, Hugh, the Iranians still possess something in the order of 650 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, 20%.
I haven't seen that or whatever. What we're seeing now is an especially shameful display because we all know from the very beginning that Iran is evil. We all know what Hamas did. They wore GoPro cameras on October 7th. We all know that Hezbollah's big, debut was murdering 241 U.S. Marines at the barracks in Beirut. We all know
something that we didn't even see until this war began after October 7th. Their first intercept was, they were supposed to be in Alaska testing a couple of months after October 7th, and they had to just use it in real time, and it has just been defying all expectations. But they have, right now I think you're going to start to see the Israelis relying more on the West for those intercepts, and it's a lot of money. But I got to tell you, that's not, for me right now, I think the Israelis are going to be able to endure this. I was telling you guys before we went on, I just spent the last week in Israel in shelters. It's brutal, but the defiance that I've seen from the Israeli people, it is, it's mind-blowing. They're just like, come at me, bro. Like, we're ready. Go ahead. Keep going. Keep firing because we have air superiority and we're going to win. And we know we're going to win, so we're willing to take the damage.
Okay,
and this is
you've gone somewhere having to deal with the problems of Iran. That is a net positive for the planet Earth.
Yeah.
And for 45 years, 46 years since the Iranian Revolution, what have the Iranians done? They spent 8 years in a war with Iraq that cost 2 million lives. They have sponsored terrorism. They have thrown Americans in wheelchairs. Their proxies have thrown Americans in wheelchairs off cruise ships, have, done terrible things to America, to the world, to Israel. Again, active the Seventh Front War. This is the end of the October 7th war, in my view.
Well, I will say
War
that
was not, and that war is Iran's. You've been making this point from the get-go on this podcast in our pages. This is Iran's war against Israel. It is not Hamas's war against Israel.
This is, and I think, by the way, Benjamin Netanyahu made that abundantly clear 9 days ago when he started this operation, and he brought it all full circle for everybody to understand. But let me just tell you, the conversation that I had with one of my best Israeli contacts right before we hopped on, what's amazing is the Gaza war is the one that is unresolved.
Right, in military action in the United States. But for the most part, if Democrats are saying it, their disingenuousness is so spectacular as to be mind-blowing. Did we go to Congress when we went into Libya under Obama? Was the drone warfare that Obama launched at individual terrorist targets that took out more than 1,000 people,
including an American citizen on foreign soil?
Was that ever brought to Congress for authorization? Biden did stuff. Nobody ever said boo. When you start mouthing off about this in relation to the person who isn't your guy, you deserve to be treated with contempt and scorn. I think it would be great somehow if Trump began the process of reporting to Congress in hopes that there would be a vote, something like that. I would be for that. But do not, people who are listening to the sound of my voice, get tempted by this notion that the United States requires, the Constitution requires that the president go to Congress anytime he uses military action. The first American military involvement abroad in the history of the United States was our war against the Barbary pirates.
Matt's comment about what Biden has done in the past, we really should be grateful that we have the leader that we do, even as flawed as he is, and all our leaders are flawed, but as flawed and difficult a creature he is to understand, at a moment like this, he proved historically important.
By the way, again, relating to that question of Kamala Harris and the Biden, what do they call the Politburo, Biden's brain trust, and the people who were Obama's brain trust, all of whom sound very funereal, or were sounding funereal last night on social media about what was going on. So where the Democratic Party stands, pull back 30,000 feet. Trump announced last night, and now Hegseth has announced, that the United States went to destroy the nuclear program of a country that has weekly sessions on Friday afternoons where hundreds of thousands of people chant death to America. And it was about to get a nuclear bomb, and he took planes, American planes with American bombs, and he dropped those bombs on the sites where it was going to have where it was going to create and deploy nuclear weapons. Historically, do you really want to be on the other side of that? Do you want to be in a party like just a year from now? I published an article about John Mearsheimer, whom no one had ever heard of, in a college magazine that I edited at Chicago before he came to Chicago, about him wanting to expand the nuclear club. There is a world of people who think that America would be best restrained by Iran having a nuclear bomb.
Right.
And of course, Israel has a nuke, and maybe then Iran should have a nuke. That would only be fair. Right. There is that. This is an idea in the head. But to go back to the Obamans, because I think they now that the Biden people seem to have evanesced from the world stage, the last successful Democratic presidency, the two-term presidency of Barack Obama, the voices that dominated that presidency, or the PR voices, are still very present. Ben Rhodes is on TV. He was the guy who essentially sold the Iranian nuclear deal. His friends at Pod Save America are going around being Pod Save America people, and they are extremely negative about what happened last night. Tommy Viador, one of the Pod Save America guys, best known for being Obama's limo driver in 2008, is like, there could be an Iranian response. Therefore, we should have done nothing. That is, I mean, again, is that where you want to be after a successful American military action?
This is to John's point, though, is that we have so long lived in a world where the people who are supposed to display strength and leadership are like those parents with unruly toddlers going 1, 2, don't maybe get to 3, but then they get to 3 and they're like 4, 5, and it is a new world. It is a new way of thinking about what our role in the country role in the world should be, and how our leaders should act. And they will be reeling, I suspect, for a very long time, because they do not like living in that world of clarity.
Matt, you have to run, and because we don't really care about regime change in Iran, as you say. If we had, there was a moment in 2009 when Barack Obama, supposedly the person who was going to tilt America away from Israel and toward the Muslim world could have looked at the uprising that did take place in 2009 in the wake of the stolen election and done something material to help the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who were in the streets hoping that that regime would fall. And he didn't do it. And Trump certainly isn't going to do it. And you know what? The Israelis may say, rise up and, look for a better future to the Iranian people. But that's in Israel's national interest. If Iran descends into civil war, let me just be frank and gross about this. That's to our advantage, and that's to Israel's advantage. Let Iran spend the next generation tending to its own garden. That's not our problem. Our problem is Iran's projection of power beyond its borders, controlling Syria, installing Hezbollah in Lebanon with over 40 years with hundreds of thousands of missiles, activating Hamas,
them being Ben Rhodes,
playing the Houthis off against
Obama alter ego person who sold the Iran deal to the American people through what he called the what did he call it? The echo chamber of the media. He said they're 27 years old. They don't know anything. I can tell them anything.
The blob.
And they'll do what I tell them. That's the famous piece by David Samuels, now a tablet, in the New York Times Magazine about the manipulation of the young new Washington press corps by the Obama administration. Remarkable piece of reporting that was. Ben Rhodes, now sort of a MSNBC guy. And he, let me find the specific tweet. He tweeted out yesterday something that is kind of brain numbing when you think it through, which was this: Trump's message to the world: if you have nukes like North Korea, I'll trade love letters with you. If you don't, I'll pull out of agreements you're keeping and bomb you during diplomacy. Just devastating to non-proliferation. So let's just unpack this. Ben Rhodes, the leading, in some ways, foreign policy voice of the Obama administration, is saying Iran is holding to its deal in what it's doing. And Trump is willing to play kissy face with North Korea, but will bomb Iran. And that this is devastating to non-proliferation. Non-proliferation being the doctrine that says that there needs to be a treaty to prevent, an international treaty to prevent, the other countries in the world from going nuclear. Let's think about what he is saying. He is saying that Trump acknowledging reality, having to deal with a nuclear North Korea, took a certain tack that I think we are all, like him, extremely discomfited by. But right? He went nice, right? He went nice with Kim Jong-un.
Right, but can I make an observation there?
Yeah.
Remember our history. He did go nice with Kim Jong-un.
The situation changes things, right? When you're dealing with someone like Kim Jong-un who has nuclear weapons, that must change how you speak to him.
But when push came to
right, you don't speak disrespectfully to someone who has a gun or a nuclear weapon.
Shove in the Hanoi summit, Trump did not give in to North Korea's demands.
Right.
He walked away. And so it's actually pretty similar treatment.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay, so so maybe I wasn't being fair to Trump there, but point is, he's saying, oh, so you make nice with North Korea, but you bomb Iran. Yes. And that is non-proliferation in this sense. We have to deal with North Korea as it is. It is a nuclear power. It went nuclear despite our efforts to buy it off, gave it money throughout the 1990s or prevent it from happening. And then in 2002, the George W. Bush administration announced to the world that North Korea had gone nuclear. And by the way, the non-proliferation people at that moment went ballistic, if you'll excuse the terrible pun, because they thought it was terrible to acknowledge that North Korea had gone nuclear because that would harm the non-proliferation treaty. It would harm the regime of non-proliferation.
We can't hurt the treaty.
Right.
That's
and
the
that
bottom
is what
line.
he is saying here, which is Trump hit, and the Israelis have hit Iran because it was going nuclear. And the non-proliferation, it's an interesting tongue twister. The non-proliferation regime failed to prevent Iran from getting to what John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, called essentially the 1 yard line, that it had marched 99 yards to a nuclear bomb, and that it was 1 yard away from getting the enriched uranium to put in a missile to make it an existential threat. And the then mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villagrosa, said, the eyes have it, meaning Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And then there was massive booing because that was what the Democratic platform was supposed to say.
Right. By 2012, it was obvious how anti-Israel the Democratic Party, the Democratic grassroots was.
Because that's what Obama needed it to say. And that was the moment at which the Democratic Party had made it clear there were two tracks and that this populist track of anti-Zionism was a real motive force. And that is what we've seen gain force and power in the last 12, 13 years. And this.
So this is not an Arab-Israeli war. This is partly an Arab-Israeli war. It's partly a struggle within the Arab world over what kind of policies to follow. And the United States has a fundamental interest in two ways. One way I already mentioned, avoiding Islamic terrorism on a grand scale with nuclear weapons to take place in the United States. But also the Abraham Accords, which were created during the first Trump administration, is attracting many Arab countries, particularly the Gulf countries and so on. They hesitate to do this while Iran is operating its basic foreign policy. So the point here was, from Israel's point of view, to deal with the one reason why Saudi Arabia doesn't want to openly have good relations with Israel. That was Iran. And the United States had the same interest. It wanted to back away from involvement in these wars. But there had to be a final event taking place. The Iranian system had to be crushed. That was the foundation of much of the terrorism, not only directed against Israel, but against other countries as well. And you remember that he spent quite a bit of time in the Middle East, talking to the Saudis, visiting with the Syrians, all sorts of discussions that were held, and endless discussions with the Palestinians, with the Gulf states, United Arab Emirates, Oman, Qatar, and so on. So remember the diplomacy that he carried out by visiting the region. You can be sure that he sounded out these governments on the question of Iran. He got the clear answers. So yes, this was an Israeli problem, but it was a broader, we'll call it a broader Islamic problem. And the United States was helping Israel in the war, defending itself at the same time for a distant, unlikely threat, but a disastrous one if it happened, and also satisfying some of the demands of the Arab world that really does not want to be confronting the Israelis. And that's where the Abraham Accord comes in.
Right, the enforcer has gone live.
So this was a pretty big development today. And once again, the question says, the U.S. nominee to lead NATO forces in Europe believes that Ukraine can win the war against Russia. And what are your thoughts? So about 46% said that's very good. That means Ukraine will get...
Yeah, no, that's not going to happen.
A little bit of a simmer for the moment is mostly going to be ramping up in a massive fashion here soon. This is also coming as intelligence from open source intelligence communities, reports, and additional information from intelligence sources inside the U.S. government are starting to say that it appears that the Iranian nuclear weapons program hasn't been completely destroyed, but only set back by several months, and that the Islamic Republic of Iran will possibly be able to create a nuclear weapon, or at least get back on the path of creating a nuclear weapon within the next several months' time. This is leading the state of Israel to say that hostile action must continue by the Israelis and the United States against the Islamic Republic of Iran to finish what has been started in the form of denuclearization, while the President of the United States has decided to take a different route and is instead chastising and denouncing both the Islamic Republic of Iran and the state of Israel for their violation of the ceasefires, and also stating that both countries are largely at fault. Outside of that, we've also been able to hear additional information as well that inside of Eastern Europe, a NATO summit has been held today, and it does appear that statements are coming out that are incredibly clear. A Russian Federation being able to retake the towns of Kinzrativka and Konstantin.
Don't care about
right here.
Ukraine.
And we can see the Israeli air-to-ground munitions slamming into the ballistic missile launchers and destroying them outright. Once again, I want to remind everyone that by this point, the United States of America and the Iranians had largely said that there was a ceasefire in effect, although it was quite clear that the Iranians were still firing on the Israelis. The Israelis had made no comment on whether a ceasefire was in effect or not, and the United States was also saying that there was a ceasefire in effect as well.
Looks like they're doing a pretty damn good job of hitting these things, too. They were like, look at that. There's a guy running off from that one right there in that clip.
Man, they were like scurrying away from that thing. It got hit and everyone started scattering across the desert. But nevertheless, finally, we were able to hear that the ceasefire generally went into effect. And then it was broken again by...
So the Enforcer channel, two brothers about 18 months apart. I think one's 23, 24, the other's 21, 22.
Largely, from what we understand, it was actually broken by the Israelis, who then conducted airstrikes or some sort of an attack against the city of Rast within northern Iran, as we were able to hear that Iranian air defenses had shot down attacking drones in the northern city of Rast, per ISNA News. We also were able to get video and picture evidence showing us a little bit later that more airstrikes were also conducted by the Israelis near to the area of the city of let me make sure I get this correct, Babelsar. That is a very difficult name for me to get track of and announce, but nevertheless, we were able to see airstrikes being conducted around that city, and we were able to see the rising smoke from one of these Israeli airstrikes in this clip right here. Then, not long afterwards, literally at the exact same time as the Israelis were conducting these strikes on the very northern part of Iran's border, near to the area of the Caspian Sea, we also started to hear that air raid sirens were once again going off throughout the areas of northern Israel, as we were able to see many hours ago. This was at 10:54 p.m. on the 23rd of June, that air raid sirens were still going off in the Home Front Command's northern regions of Israel. Once again, it doesn't really appear that things are doing all too well. And we're also seeing that apparently inside the Pentagon, there is still a bit of a panic mode going on, as we were able to confirm that earlier in the day, Domino's Pizza, Papa John's Pizza, Extreme Pizza, and also We the Pizza, that's a pretty fun one, apparently still had unusually high traffic, showing that a lot of Pentagon government officials and also military personnel were still ordering in pizza to the Pentagon, so that way they could continue to work the incredibly long hours and shifts that they had ahead of them, as it appears that the Pentagon is still trying to work a lot to try and figure out the situation. Meanwhile, inside of the actual U.S. government, we have been able to hear information that apparently, while the U.S. strike against the nuclear facilities may have hit some pretty resounding hits, it appears that, at least according to multiple sources pertaining to the matter, that there may have not been as significant damage to the nuclear program as we believed. It doesn't appear that the nuclear program has been suspended indefinitely. It appears that it may have only been suspended for about a half year, as we are assuming at this point that some Iranian abilities to enrich uranium and also to attempt to produce nuclear weaponry may have only been stymied for about 4 to 6 months at this point, meaning that once that 4 to 6 month period concludes, the Iranians will most likely have their nuclear research and development program back on its feet and will be working towards the production of a nuclear weapon again. It is quite clear at this point that the attacks by the United States of America and the hasty and rapid ceasefire attempt hasn't really achieved much of anything, and even more so, it's now starting to appear a little bit more obvious, even by U.S. intelligence sources within the government, that there was not really...
So who's going to be able to resupply more quickly and effectively, all right? Israel or Iran? Will it be the United States coming to the aid of Israel primarily, or will China be coming to the aid of Iran?
A successful attack that truly knocked out Iran's nuclear weapons and research program indefinitely. It appears that it may only be a temporary setback for the Iranians. We've also been able to hear that the U.S. has warned the Iranians to not approach their nuclear facilities at Fordow and Isfahan, where apparently, according to the United States, there is...
All right, where else do you get this consistent granular detail about the war? All right, this channel's called The Enforcer. Two blokes, early 20s, seem to have military background, I think. Best channel to follow the Ukraine war, the Israel war, breaking news, right? They're pro-American, right, but they don't talk about domestic politics.
Uranium under the ruins. According to information that we have from Con News, Israeli and U.S. intelligence is monitoring these locations.
And they've got an X account, and it's worth following the accounts that they retweet.
But we're also getting a completely different story from probably the best third-party source that we could get on the condition of the enriched uranium, which has generally gone missing from what we understand inside of Iran. So once again, remind everyone, since we are largely covering this information at the moment, there's around 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, which would clearly indicate that there was a significant amount of enriched uranium inside the facilities that had been deposited over the surrounding areas as a result of the strikes. That is also confirming, from what we can tell, at least at the information at the moment, that the uranium actually was moved by the Iranians, and the Iranians were not lying about that information. There is 60% fuel-enriched grade uranium still sitting out there somewhere inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. We do not know where it is at the moment, at least it is what we know right now, and it could be literally anywhere. We generally understand, however, that the chances of it being outside the Islamic Republic of Iran is a little low. We have not been able to hear that the People's Republic of China took possession of the uranium, and we've also not been able to see any Chinese flights with transponders on that appear to have flown into Iranian territory since the statement has been made by the Iranian government that they're going to be continuing their nuclear weapons program.
But if North Korea wants to send nuclear warhead to Iran, right, what could Israel or the United States do about it?
And they are actually recovering their uranium from their secure sites, wherever those may be, and getting possession of it again to start working towards restarting their nuclear weapons program. So it is
also notice as well that even though the United States government officially is disputing the fact of whether or not the nuclear sites were destroyed completely or not, the U.S. government is not disputing the fact that the uranium is completely missing. That's one thing they have not disputed. And we did see the trucks lined up in front of Fordow the other day on satellite footage. They appeared to be taking something out like we talked about last night on stream. And also, there's been no contamination reported in the city of Qom, which is right next to Fordow. So, like the enforcer said, all signs signs line up to, the Iranians got the material out. It's somewhere. Maybe China took it. Maybe Iran hid it in another secret facility. We simply don't know. But the U.S., Israel, and pretty much everybody involved does agree that the uranium is gone, and nobody knows really where it's at. I wonder if the Israelis have any intelligence that we're not aware of about where the whereabouts of the uranium went, because it's a bit crazy that nobody tracked those trucks leaving the facility, and nobody has a clue where it went. It seems a bit fishy to me, like maybe they know something we don't, but it's just a guessing game at this point.
And I see some people trying to challenge the validity of this information, but I want to make this as clear as possible. There are different sources saying different things at the moment, and so far, from what we've seen, practically everyone on the planet right now is generally saying that the uranium has gone missing and that it was not destroyed, and it does appear that the Iranians can start up the nuclear program again soon. The only people who are saying otherwise is the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense. Literally everyone else, including a neutral third party, the IAEA chief, Grossi, and I want to also show this really quickly for some people who are trying to say that our news coverage is entirely slanted with some sort of political bias. The director of the IAEA, Grossi, who is currently the guy who is in charge of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is a part of the United Nations, made this statement to Fox News, not CNN. So this was reported by Fox News, or at least his direct statements to Fox earlier today. He has said, and this is about the most neutral third-party statement that we could get so far, that enriched uranium could not be located following the U.S. military strikes, meaning that it is not at Fordo, it's not at Isfahan, it's not in Natanz, or any of the facilities that were hit. It is somewhere else inside the country, and we do not know where it is at the moment. So it does appear that at the moment, we do not know where the enriched uranium has actually ended up, which is now starting to become a little bit concerning, especially considering that at least publicly, the Iranian government is making it somewhat clear, and it appears that many intelligence officials inside the U.S. government and elsewhere, even in Israel, are also making it quite clear that it does appear that the Iranians may have only been set back by a couple of months. That can be viewed as a success in its own way, that we've been able to set the nuclear program back by a couple of months, but we haven't been able to stop the development of a nuclear weapon whatsoever inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. We've only pushed back the time where it would take for them to be able to create and use a nuclear weapon, but we have not been able to stop it completely, meaning that while we've done a good job initially, the job is still not yet done, and there's still more to do to ensure that the Islamic Republic of Iran will not possess a nuclear weapon at any point in the future. But still, beyond that, we have also been able to hear that the Israelis have stated that they now believe that there are undeclared nuclear sites or facilities that are still active, but the country has no information about their location, possibly suggesting...
So they just now discovered the fact that there's some secret nuclear sites that they weren't aware of. Honestly, I'll say this. Israel is our ally, but at the same time, though, I really find it hard to believe that Israel just discovered some secret nuclear sites, because they probably knew this before, and now they're just simply saying it. And I'm not saying that Israel's trying to set us up, because I know some people are going to be jumping to that conclusion that, oh, Israel's just like releasing this now so that way the U.S. has to go back to war with Iran. That's not the reason why they're doing it, but they're releasing this to the public. I'm sure the U.S. already knew about it behind the scenes as well, but this basically leaves the door right back open once again to potentially have to intervene inside of Iran once more, because these facilities, allegedly, according to what the Israelis are saying, have active centrifuges in some of them. We're not clear exactly how large the equipment is or what type of equipment it is, but they were told that maybe a centrifuge is located in one of these secret facilities. And how does Israel even know they exist if they don't even know what the location? I'm like, it seems like they're holding back info for some reason.
That is something that it does seem a little bit suspicious to me, I will say. And I also find that a little bit weird that Israel would withhold that information and then also say, we know there's undeclared nuclear facilities, but we don't even know where they are. That generally is like saying, we know that, that's like the police saying, we know that there's a crime being committed, but we don't know where it is, and we don't know what kind of crime it is, but we know that there's a crime being committed somewhere in the city. It's like, well, then you don't even know what it is. You're just saying something to say it. So it appears that at least at the moment, the Israeli intelligence is not much to go off of, rather than them saying, there's something out there somewhere. We don't know where it is or what it is, but we think it might be this. So not really a lot to work off of, at least there. Still, generally, at least from what we can tell at the moment, while the U.S. strikes were generally successful in causing a significant amount of damage to the Fordo and Natanz uranium enrichment facilities, as well as the Isfahan research facility, it also doesn't appear that the strike has been entirely successful and actually knocking out the uranium enrichment abilities of the Islamic Republic of Iran for them to take that 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium and then turn it into 400 kilograms of 90% enriched uranium, which would actually be at a weapons grade and allow them to complete their dreams of creating a nuclear weapon of mass destruction that can be used to target countries within the Middle East and eventually to produce a ballistic missile or some sort of an ICBM large enough and capable enough to actually reach the United States. It appears that those objectives have not really been reached at the moment, showing that there may be more to do, at least from this point on. Nevertheless, it does appear that a lot of people are talking about that at the moment. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about it as well?
Okay, so we're asking a question here about the entire situation with the breakdown of the ceasefire between Iran and Israel and the timeline about how that went down. And once again, it's very confusing. So, I tried to cover it in the short video. The enforcer covered it pretty well as well on the stream here, but I can understand why some people are still a little bit lost. So the question is, Israel launched huge attacks on Tehran just before the ceasefire went into effect, and then Iran breached the ceasefire in technicality, and they actually breached it. They were the first ones to do so. And what are your thoughts? So about 29% said Iran is at fault for the ceasefire failure, while 18% said Israel is the one at fault, and 42% said it's a mix of both Iran and Israel being at fault for causing the ceasefire to fall apart. Now, in my opinion, Israel made a bad move by attacking Tehran with these massive munitions right before the ceasefire went into effect. That was a bad move. Israel attacked Tehran with ground-shaking munitions, and they were humongous explosions. And I think we have the footage here on the stream we're going to show you all eventually, but it was.
So sorry, I've been working out, and that's why I have to keep stepping away from the stream. But let's keep the good times going.
Bigger than the ones we've seen previously, and that was right after they had agreed to a ceasefire. So start things, and then Iran, after that happened, then breached the ceasefire. They were the first ones to actually breach it after it went into effect, and they're the ones who were the first ones to actually breach the real deal. So they were both at fault, in my opinion. That was not a ceasefire, which neither side really wanted. That's why they broke it so quick. So it was a pointless ceasefire. I'll be honest with you. It was kind of a cheap political trick, and we're right back to square one right now because they're once again launching drones at each other, and the ceasefire basically doesn't exist anymore. It's just kind of like a lull in hostilities, and they're going to go right back to it probably in a couple of days. So I'm with the 42%. It's kind of a mix of both options. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, really quickly, by the way, Mandy, I can't find that footage on our Twitter to show. That's why it's not on our map tonight. It's not showing up on our Twitter main feed. But, but beyond that, I would have to generally say that it is really a mix. I would actually have to say that, as far as I can tell, both sides are responsible for the violation of the ceasefire that's been seen. But at the same time, that does not mean that both sides are at fault or one side's at fault over the other. I generally would actually say that the whole situation has largely been mishandled, at least with the implementation of a ceasefire. Generally, a lot of people do not understand this, and it always seems like it's a lot easier said than done, and in this sense, it actually is true, that once a war or warlike actions begin, it's pretty difficult to actually stop them. It's pretty much like opening Pandora's box. You can't really just snap your fingers and have wars come to an end. Once a war begins, it takes a lot to actually get one to end. That's just how it works historically. And so trying to start a war, because this is generally what happened, starting on October 3rd of 2023, we saw a whole bunch of escalations being conducted by the Israelis and the Iranian proxies. Then the Iranians joined in on an attack in early 2024, and then again in another attack in later 2024. Then we saw during the entire time there was a threat or fear that the Iranians were nuclearizing, which is quite clear and evident at this point. So with that in mind, the Israelis decided they could no longer wait for the U.S. to attempt failed negotiations, which are true. They all failed. So the Israelis moved on into striking the Iranians directly in an attempt to destroy their nuclear facilities and also wipe out their government. The U.S. then joined. All of this pretty much escalating the situation the entire time. The U.S. then joins in, drops Moabs and Tomahawks on 3 of the most important nuclear facilities inside of Iran, which is the highest level or highest order of escalation that we had seen so far in the conflict. And then literally a day or really 36 hours after that, we try and implement a ceasefire. Nothing showed, at least up till that point, that there was any sort of de-escalation or off-ramps being conducted. So we move up to the highest level of escalation possible, where there's now hostile coalition action against the Iranians, and then we try and hop right off into a peace. And that's just not possible. You have to have some sort of level of de-escalation to some degree to actually see that the war ends. For example, you have to see that the Iranians actually reach out primarily to say, we cannot deal with this anymore.
All right, the best way to achieve a lasting peace is to stay strong, guys.
If this keeps going on, our country will be destroyed. Let us talk with y'all, and let's see what would happen to end it. And then the United States goes, we agree, we don't really want to be in this conflict, but we would like to end it. You really can't go in and just say, kids, calm down, stop fighting or I'll turn this car around. That's just not how global diplomacy works. So with an implementation of a ceasefire with 2 countries that are now going at each other's throats and have been for weeks, and not only that, the United States just got done slamming some of the largest bombs, at least in weight in history, about 12 of them on a single facility. You can't really just hop right off of the conflict path at that point and then straight into a peace. That generally just cannot work. It doesn't work. If you go look through any period of history, peaces are generally not created on that kind of an escalatory level at that point. You just can't stop things like that. So the implementation of the ceasefire was poorly planned in the outset, and then the follow-through by the Iranians and the Israelis might as well be expected at that point. This whole ceasefire was generally doomed to fail from the start because it was just started way too early and way too quickly. And it would be good to see a quick resolution to what's going on in the Middle East, but it has to be done at the right place and the right time, at least in this sequence of events, and it was just done far too early. I would also say generally that moving the gears of war that quickly, it's unrealistic because we're still seeing that's going on at this point, and we're also seeing that as more information's coming out, that there may be more that the United States has to do just in airstrikes alone against the Iranians to actually achieve what we're looking for, which is a denuclearization of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And that doesn't mean, I want to make this somewhat clear, because some people put themselves up on like a what should we call it, the gallows pretty much, to where if the president's objectives were not completely achieved on the first try, then they're swinging from the gallows. That's not the case at all. The reality is that the strike itself was a very good idea. I think it was a great great idea, and it generally was incredibly well implemented. There were no U.S. losses. We hit all of our targets, but there's still work to be done. People have to understand we're getting more information now, and it's becoming more pressingly clear at this point that the kind of damage that we implemented wasn't the severe and crippling damage we were looking for. So we have to go in and we have to do a little bit more. It doesn't mean that it was a complete failure. I think we started off with a very good shot at it, but still at the same time, we have to go in and we have to finish the job we started. Because now let's look at it in the situation that we're dealing with. Let's look at the cards we now have in our hand. We have bombed the Iranians, so now the Iranians are clearly pissed off at us. I mean, that's why they fired at the U.S. base at Al Udeid in Qatar, and that's why air raid sirens were sounding throughout the entirety of the Middle East just a couple of days ago at all U.S. bases. It's because the Iranians were pissed, and we were scared they were going to try and attack and to kill American servicemen over there. So it's quite clear they're enraged. So now there's no doubt about it or question about it. We even saw in the Iranian National Assembly that they took a copied picture of an American flag and called it on fire in front of everyone. They're pretty angry with us. So there's no question or doubt about it at this point. If they do create a nuclear weapon, they're guaranteed going to find a way to create an ICBM that will make that nuclear weapon reach us. And if the time is ripe ever, they will fire that missile at us, and they might end up killing millions of us here inside the United States. So there's now a clear and evident threat without a doubt. If you didn't have any doubts about it, whether they hate us or not, after we bomb them, they're certainly going to be hating us. With that in mind, now knowing that they are going to be restarting a nuclear weapons program again, and while we did cause a decent amount of damage to it, we still didn't cause enough, and they're still only being pushed back by a couple of months. So it does appear, folks, I would say in my opinion, that it seems more pressingly so that it doesn't really matter who's violating the ceasefire at the moment. The ceasefire may have not been that great of an idea because the U.S. itself, pertaining to our own security interests in the region, has more work to do. Gotta say that I greatly appreciate the president's initial efforts with Operation Midnight Hammer to try and destroy the nuclear weapons program outright. But now seeing the facts and now seeing the information we have, while it caused a good amount of damage, it didn't destroy it completely. So we still have to go in and we still have to do some work. Doesn't mean that it was a failure. Doesn't mean the president is a fool or an angel. Doesn't mean anything like that. It just means that we have to look at the cards we're being dealt with and we have to play them accordingly, which means that we still have more work to do. That's the reality.
Well, the crazy part is this. After all the statements that were made today by U.S. officials about trying to keep the ceasefire in place and keep it working, because I see people in the chat asking, what's happening right this second? Is the ceasefire in effect? Is it over? Or what's happening? Like, what's going on right now? As of right this second, they're still trying to enforce the ceasefire. The United States is still under the premise that both sides have violated the ceasefire, but the ceasefire is still in effect. So that's why we're still seeing not a total war between these countries or a total air attack on each other's countries right now. It's because they are trying to still adhere to the ceasefire in some way or another. But also, about an hour ago, the U.S. president retweeted a video of B-2 bombers with the song Bomb, 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 Iran in the background and reposted that to his True Social page. So in the midst of all this peace talk about ceasefires and all this Nobel Peace Prize business, we're seeing a video be reposted of B-2s potentially going back to Iran. So, you can interpret that how you will, but it sounds like there's at least some talk in the background that maybe the B-2s might make a second run on Iran, but it's not very clear right now. It's just kind of all over the place.
I would generally have to say it is all over the place at the moment. We really don't know where it's heading at the moment. But that would generally be the situation, at least from what we're seeing it right now. Most likely more large or significant airstrikes would be able to achieve a great deal, at least on the U.S.'s end, with the kind of firepower that we are able to wield, at least against the Iranians. But I would generally believe that there is still a lot of work to be done to be able to denuclearize Iran. And I believe that we may also have to consider the elimination of top government officials, including Ali Khamenei, to possibly also ensure that the Islamic Republic's government, which exists currently, may cease to exist. So that way that will also ensure that on a governmental political level in Iran, there won't be any political ambitions to pursue.
What about radical love and inclusion? Have we tried giving them a hug? Have we tried telling them how much we care?
Nuclearization in terms of weaponry here in the future. That's what I would generally believe at the moment. But I hope I was able to address that, at least as far as the situation is concerned in the Middle East, the best we can. But we also have a lot of people talking as well about the rekindling of war in the region, as we are seeing that both sides are clearly violating the ceasefire at this point, almost on a regular basis at this moment. And it does appear that a lot of people have been talking about that and the possible restart of the conflict here very soon. So, Matthew, what are people thinking, and what are you thinking as well?
Also, I see people like my Beach Boys interpretation right there. I think that little tune that's in the background, that presidential thing that was posted on True Social, is some Beach Boys song or something they took, and they put the lyrics. Obviously, it's Bomb Iran. It's the lyrics now, but I see everybody like that. It's quite interesting. But anyways, jumping into our poll in all seriousness, the question says: since the ceasefire between Israel and Iran, there have been small stealth attacks between Israel and Iran, and is more war inevitable? That's the big question. So 58% said yes, war will restart very soon, while 14% said no, the ceasefire will work and hold, and 22% said it's about a 50-50 chance as of right now. And in my opinion, I'm definitely with the 58%. War is coming again. It's certainly not over. Israel's saying they're not done with Iran. So, I mean, that's a pretty clear statement. They're not finished with them yet. So I think they're going to be coming back for a round 2. And it's unclear if the U.S. is going to be involved with it or not. Once you get around the juvenile video that was posted today by the president, it's kind of hard to tell what the actual action is going to be against Iran because without a clear statement, it's kind of speculation up to that point. So I think war is coming back. They're already attacking each other with drones. That's been documented today. So the ceasefire is not holding very well if you even consider it a success at all. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would generally have to agree with the near 60% as well. I believe that war will be restarting in the region. Considering that the ceasefire is being violated at this point regularly by the Israelis and the Iranians, it is very obvious that the ceasefire is an incredibly weak one. It was built on a house of cards. It's soon to collapse at this point, and that conflict is going to be returning to the region. That also means that the United States is going to have to figure out what we are doing in the region. There's a lot of diplomatic or foreign policy initiatives at play at this moment with how we are going to respond. But I generally would say that we could also expect, at least here probably within the next few weeks, future U.S. military involvement, most likely through airstrikes once again against the Iranians to try and find, target, and destroy any facilities that may be housing the enriched uranium, or to also ensure that any machines or abilities that the Iranians have to be able to enrich, refine, and produce weapons of mass destruction from weapons-grade uranium or plutonium will also be removed as well. I think that largely is going to be the case at this point because it's quite pressingly clear at the moment that the Islamic Republic of Iran's nuclear program, while postponed for a good while at this point, is still nowhere close to being destroyed, and we are going to have to go and make sure to take care of them once and for all, and that might take additional action. So with that, I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. I'm seeing a decent amount of people talking about all kinds of stuff. Someone said, weapons of mass destruction in Iran 2.0. That seems like it's not really a good statement because this is what we're hearing. This is the Iranian foreign minister. The nuclear program will continue. This isn't Iraq, buddy. Like, I just want to make that clear to some people who are saying that. This is not Iraq where they swear up and down prior to the U.S. invasion in 2003 that they do not even have uranium of any kind. And then we found out that there was no uranium in Iraq of any kind. This is Iran. This is a totally different country. This is a country that is openly admitting that they're enriching uranium to a weapons grade. This is a country that when we asked them, would you only enrich to a 60% grade for fuel purposes? They said, no, we will not have any holds or any sort of limitations on what we can enrich, and we will enrich up to 90% if we want to. And there is absolutely no other purpose for the Iranians to deny any limitations to uranium enrichment unless if they were working.
So I don't like cringe TV, cringe movies, but there was a cringe movie I just watched was called Friendship, came out in 2024, where a total dork befriends the TV weatherman next door. Dark comedy, cringe comedy. Please watch it. Please tell me what you think. I've also started watching Tires, politically incorrect comedy on Netflix, the latest season of America's Sweethearts about the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. That dropped. That was excellent. But, I mean, the most compelling entertainment of all is this war.
On a nuclear weapon. 90% enriched uranium can only be used in the production and use of nuclear weaponry. That makes it entirely clear and obvious we're not dealing with an Iran 2.0 here. And we're also not dealing with an Iran 2.0 because, believe it or not, if you want to deny it or accept it, there are nuclear uranium enrichment plants like the Natanz plant, which you can clearly see from satellite, and Iran has admitted for years is enriching uranium. So it's not something like Iraq where there's not really a lot of proof or any proof at all when we invaded in 2003, whether they were creating a nuclear weapon or not. There is an unlimited amount of proof and data that is showing that they are creating a nuclear weapon. That is something that is, once again, got to say wildly clearly here, a clear sign that they're working towards a nuclear weapon. I would also say that it's a very clear sign, a much more clear sign, that if they weren't working on a nuclear weapon, why in the world are they so adamant on restarting their nuclear program or enriching uranium inside of their country instead of being like any other country that buys their enriched uranium fuel for their reactors for peaceful purposes from an actual nuclear power, like the People's Republic of China or the Russian Federation or the United Kingdom or France or the United States? Why don't they do that? Why aren't they doing that? It's because they're using those enrichment plants to be able to produce a nuclear weapon of mass destruction. It is incredibly clear. It's not like there's a lack of facts or information or proof on that. The proof is quite obvious. It's more so than clear. So if you're one of the people who still aren't believing that, I'm sorry, but that's generally uninformed. There is so much proof, it's an insurmountable amount of evidence that they are trying to produce a nuclear weapon. And we have to work off of that sort of a mindset because if some people want to remain with their heads in the sand and then say that they're not developing a nuclear weapon, the day they test a nuclear...
Hey, Ricardo's in the chat. He says, I can't believe that Donald Trump was allowed to criticize Israel. Who do you think's more powerful than Donald Trump? You really think that Mossad or the Israeli prime minister or some Jewish financier is more powerful than Donald Trump? Trump needs to stay in his lane. Why aren't you happy right? A normal American would be happy that a regime that is dedicated to death to America, to a regime that has slaughtered thousands of Americans, has been humiliated, that has been drubbed, that's been reduced, that has had its nuclear and terror and missile capabilities drained, right? A normal American would celebrate that. Now, while I'm 100% emotionally in favor of this war with Iran, rationally, cognitively, I haven't taken a side because there are just too many complications. There are just too many factors. There are just too much that I can't see if this incentivizes Iran to do something horrific. I mean, what if like thousands more Americans die because Donald Trump decided to assist Bibi Netanyahu in bombing Iran? What thousands of Americans have been killed by Iran? Right, Iran funds Hezbollah, who blow up hundreds of Marines, and Iran killed way over 1,000 American soldiers in Iraq. Right, so there is a ton of American blood on the hands of Iran. Iran, on a near daily basis, its leaders since the 1979 revolution have been chanting death to America. Iran's the #1 funder, enabler, subsidizer, and director of terrorism around the world. Right? Why would you not be on board with reducing this peril to Americans? Right? I hate those who want to slaughter Americans, don't you? A normal, natural, healthy reaction is to hate those who want to kill you.
Nuclear weapon is going to be unbelievable to these people when it was quite clear and obvious to everyone else that they were creating a nuclear weapon
Oh, Iraq is Iran's fault? I didn't say anyone's at fault. I simply pointed out that Iran has killed thousands of Americans. I haven't taken any moral indignation against it. If I were an Iranian leader, right, I would be positioning to try to drive America out of the Middle East too, possibly try to destroy the Jewish state, right? If I was a fire-breathing Shia Iranian leader, right, I'd probably look at the world and say, wait, I'm not making any moral judgment here. I am saying that it is abnormal, if you're an American and you're following this, that you don't rejoice at the humiliation and the decimation of a regime dedicated to slaughtering you.
Entire time, and we could have completely avoided an incident where the Iranians may possibly nuke the United States or Israel at any point in the future if we had gone in and dealt with it now. So I hope that addresses that the best I can. And also, I saw someone say there's still no evidence of a weapon of mass destruction in Iran right now. Well, yes, that's because we're working to stop them from having a weapon of mass destruction. By the time they have a proof of a weapon of mass destruction existing in the country, it's going to be too late. So I hope that answers that well, at least with the information and the evidence that we have at the moment. But that's generally the lay of the land right now, at least from what we can see. But moving on from that and outside of this news, we have also been able to hear of some ongoing developments inside of Europe, as we've been able to hear that the NATO summit has begun today. And we were able to hear that the new Lieutenant General Grinkovich, nominated by the U.S. to lead NATO forces in Europe, stated today, Senator, I think Ukraine can win. I think when your own homeland is threatened.
Okay, that will do it for now. I got to finish my work.